Good evening, Camby. Welcome to the May 18th, 2022 regular city council meeting. If you would please stand for invocation and then pledge of allegiance. Actually, just ask for a moment of silence, please, and just for the young man who was struck this weekend by a train here in town. Just ask for just some moment of reflection for him, his family, and friends that are impacted by their loss, and also for our police officers and firefighters and paramedics that responded to this horrific tragedy. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is a proclamation for High School Senior Week. So this proclamation is declaring the week of May 30th, 2022 as honoring Canby High School class of 2022 week. Whereas June 3rd, 2022 marks the graduation for Canby High School seniors. Whereas graduation is typically a time to gather and celebrate this important milestone together. Whereas it is important to acknowledge the challenging situations being presented to graduating seniors and honor their hard work. And whereas we encourage families, friends, and neighbors to take some time to congratulate those graduates in our community, recognize their achievements, and honor them and their journey of education. Now, therefore, I, Brian Hodson, Mayor of the City of Canby, encourage all citizens to join with our neighbors and the Canby School District Board of Directors to celebrate with me in declaring the week of May 30th, 2022 as honoring our high school senior class of 2022. Congratulations, class of 2022. We applaud you in your efforts and your hard work. Given unto my hand this 18th day of May 2022 in the city of Canby, Oregon. This came about as an idea from Dr. Downs and some conversation with some of the school board members about, here we have a class that went through, and probably the longest of the graduating classes we've had that have been the most impacted and probably challenged the longest with COVID and things like that. And so those seniors, if parents that may be watching are friends of seniors, there's some things planned coming up that will be announced for senior week for the students here in town. So be on the lookout for some of those things for them. And I will be delivering this, I think, next Thursday to the senior class for that. So thank you, Scott, for working, and Joe, and everyone for working on that with the school board. Next on the agenda is citizen input and community announcement. So it's an opportunity for audience members to address the city council on items not on the agenda. If you are attending in person, please complete a yellow testimony card that's usually located on the back podium and hand it to Maya, our city recorder, and she'll make sure that I get it. Each person will be given 3 minutes to speak. Staff and city council will make every effort to respond to questions raised during citizen input before the meeting ends or shortly as possible thereafter. If you want to speak and address us virtually via Zoom, please make sure that you reach the city recorder by 4:30 on our city council meeting evenings with your name and topic, and we will make sure you get queued up. I have no yellow cards. I see no one on Zoom, so we're moving on from that. Thank you. Next on the agenda is the consent agenda. And so this is this evening the approval of the minutes for April 6, 2022, and then appointee of member Amy Noss to the Library Advisory Board.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the consent agenda that includes the minutes of the April 6, 2022 City Council regular meeting and the appointment of member Amy Noss to the Library Advisory Board with a term ending June 30, 2024.
I'll second.
Motion's been made by Council President Hensley and seconded by Councilor Varwick to approve the consent agenda, which includes the approval of the minutes of the April 6, 2022 City Council regular meeting, and then the appointment of Amy Noss to the Library Advisory Board with a term ending June 30th of 2024. Any discussion on these pieces or questions? Yes.
Just a point of order that I'm going to abstain, but only because I wasn't here on the April 6th meeting. I'm perfectly fine with everything that's.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And any abstention? One abstention. Thank you, Councilor Spoon. Moving quickly along here, so ordinances and resolutions. First up is ordinance number 1571, an ordinance authorizing the city administrator to enter a collective bargaining agreement, a CBA, between the city of Canby, Oregon and the Camby Police Association, and this is a second reading. So just to recap, last meeting, and we've had Joe Lindsay, our city attorney, and Melissa Bissett and Chief Tro were part of our bargaining unit with the police department union and coming up with a new bargaining agreement or contract with Canby PD. And so we went over this quite extensively last meeting and the meeting before that, and I think several meetings before that. And so basically it's just new language regarding some training, vacation, pay breakdowns, et cetera, and whatnot. Joe, am I leaving anything out of what we was?
No, if folks wanted the particulars, they could definitely go back to just the last meeting where we really highlighted all of the changes. But it's a 3-year contract, and everybody's happy, so we're glad to get to this point.
Yeah, I commend, again, the city's team in getting this hammered out and working really well with the union to get it done very well and very efficiently. I think everybody gave up a little to get to the finish line, but also I think not everybody got what they wanted, which is okay too, so appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve ordinance number 1571, an ordinance authorizing the city administrator to enter into a collective bargaining agreement, CBA, between the city of Canby, Oregon and the Canby Police Association.
Second.
Motion's been made by Councilor Varwick and seconded by Council President Hensley to approve ordinance number 1571, an ordinance authorizing the city administrator to enter into a collective bargaining agreement between the city of Canby, Oregon and the Canby Police Association with a roll call vote.
Mayor Hodson. Oh, no, sorry.
It's okay. I'm good. Thank you for asking.
Councilor Bangs.
Aye.
Councilor Parker.
Aye.
Councilor Spoon.
Aye.
Councilor Barwick.
Aye.
Councilor Marine.
Aye.
And Council President Hensley.
Aye.
That motion carries 6-0. Thank you. Next up is ordinance number 1572, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to execute a contract with Eagle Elsner Incorporated in the amount of $888,888.88 for construction of the 2022 street maintenance project, also up for second reading this evening. So Jerry, since you're here, I'm going to have you come up. I thought for sure you'd bring Spencer with you tonight so he could be here. Is he on his way?
I don't believe you.
I don't believe that for a second. So every year we take the street maintenance fee dollars, gas tax dollars, maybe a few other pieces, put it together and come up with a paving goal for the year. We're going to do 1.2 miles.
Yeah, roughly right around there.
And so this year, after going out for bid and getting these back, that's the amount that we're going to try to get all this fabulous paving done for our city. Am I leaving anything out, Mr. Nelzine?
No, and we'll also add some Clackamas County funding towards that last year and this year. So that's moving. But I had one more quick thing to add, if I may.
Yeah.
I was going to let you guys know that Mr. Dave Elsner, owner of Eagle Elsner Paving, who we've been our contractor mostly over the years, was awarded an award for the urban street asphalt pavement project for 2021. with the city of Canby on the streets that they paved with the city last year. And so they have a quick flyer here that they wanted to share with you. We offered to do some public, let them come and talk, but I just thought I would share that with all of you guys, that if you drove their roads, they're smooth and nice, and a lot of the stuff that we do now has been a big help for Mcleod Elsner. They use 2 pavers, so we don't have cold joints. They just have been doing it. They have a local batch plant here, and they're kind of like a family with us. We worked with them for so long. So I just wanted to pass that on too, that the city of Canby and Mcleod Elsner was recognized on this. Oh.
It's Spencer's chance.
For those of you that are here and watching from home,
I told you, Tracy.
Okay, maybe, so now I owe you one.
so,
Mr. Pollock.
Mr. Pollock, would you please come up to the table? So it's generally kind of what's become a tradition here at the city of Canby is when when people do have the tendency to get promoted and are then put in charge of projects like, I don't know, the city's paving program, I definitely like to have them come and unwillingly and most begrudgingly be called in front of the council to tell us all about the project. And you weren't here 2 weeks ago to tell us all about the project, but I do want to congratulate you on executing, or at least putting together is this your first paving project for the city?
This is.
So hopefully it'll be executed smoothly and we'll applaud you when it's done.
I'm hoping so as well. And I thought I timed this a little bit better, that you guys would have had this done and over with.
We could tell by your reaction as you walked in
Started
the
to slow
door.
yourself in here.
Yeah.
Jerry stalled and everything.
I know.
Councilor Park and I were even stalling trying to figure this out.
But we've not had the opportunity. Congratulations on your promotion, and we have no doubt that this project will come out just a smashing success. So, so we
No pressure.
appreciate you, and I later will mention that it is Public Works Week. But to both of you, thank you for what you do for our city and your teams for doing what you do to keep Camby running. Literally, so see, it wasn't so bad, Spencer. You know, yeah. So thank you.
I still want to know how they got to a bid of 8 8s.
Yeah, Spencer, can you tell us how you got to all 8s?
I will ask them on how they got there.
We'll ask the estimate.
And no change orders, because we want that to be the
We
check.
want it to be 8 8 8 8 8. Yeah.
Mr.
Yes,
Mayor?
yes, yeah.
I move to approve Ordinance 1572, authorizing the city administrator to execute a contract with Eagle Elsner Incorporated in the amount of $888,888.88 for the 2022 street maintenance project.
The motion has been made by Councilor Spoon and seconded by Councilor Bangs to approve ordinance number 1572, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to execute a contract with Eagle Elsner Incorporated in the amount of $888,888.88 for construction of the 2022 street maintenance project. Again, roll call vote.
Counselor Bangs?
Aye.
Counselor Parker?
Aye.
Counselor Spoon?
Aye.
Counselor Varwig?
Aye.
Counselor Marine?
Aye.
And Council President Hensley.
Aye.
Great. That passes 6-0.
Thanks, everyone.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Next on the agenda is ordinance number 1573, an ordinance authorizing the city administrator to execute a contract with Mcleod Incorporated Consulting Engineers for design and construction phase engineering services for the extension of Walnut Street, holy smokes, Walnut Street to Highway 99E, our first reading. Mr. Archer.
Thank you, Mayor Hodson and council. Actually, I'm going to invite Mr. Nalzine to come back up again just in anticipation of any questions, but I'll just give you a brief report. So this is the Walnut Street to Highway 99 extension road that we've been planning for a while, and we know is a important priority for the community and for the city council. This is the next big step in that process. You've supported some other actions actions along the way. And so following a competitive procurement process, call back from our last meeting, this was the consultant engineer that we selected, and they will do the final design and engineering on that roadway for us under this contract. And so we're very excited to be here with this progress on that, and with your approval of this, we'll follow our process of it'll take a first and second reading, but once that timeline has been met and the 30-day period, we'll get to work as soon as possible. Jerry, is there anything else that you would like to add to that?
No, you covered most of it. Yep.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I move to approve ordinance 1573, authorizing the city administrator to execute a contract with Mcleod Incorporated in the amount of $601,000 for design and construction phase engineering services for the extension of South Walnut Street to Highway 99E to come up for second reading on June 1st, 2022.
Second.
Okay, the motion has been made by Council President Hensley and seconded by Councilor Varwig to approve ordinance 1573, authorizing the city administrator to execute a contract with Mcleod Incorporated in the amount of $601,000 for design and construction phase engineering services for the extension of South Walnut Street to Highway 99E to come up for a second reading on June 1st, 2022. Any comments or questions? I will say I'm very excited that we're at this point. It's not quite as fast as I wanted, but it is definitely screaming along, Jerry. So I thank you, and Scott, thank you as well. This is
That's a pretty good clip.
this is really truly a good clip
I do have a
for
question.
the industrial park.
I apologize for telling you no a year and a half ago.
You know, and you say that every time I see you, and I think you are the first city staff member to tell me no.
Yeah.
I've never had even a city manager tell me no.
Yeah.
They go, well, Mr. Mayor, that's not a bad idea. Let me look into it, and which generally I read as no, but they don't say it. But but this is, all kidding aside, I did ask for, I think, a year, 2 years but we are,
Done in a year.
is that what I asked? Okay, well,
Yeah,
but we're
and
now,
No wonder you said no.
We're closer right now to that year than we were then.
yeah, this is an important project, I think, for the industrial park, I think for Camby, in terms of when we talk about the traffic flow and what that's gonna look like, so, I appreciate the plowing through to get this where we're at. Councilor Spoon?
Yeah, and I think for the public that may not be as, have followed all the components of this project, I think I can speak for all of us when I want to acknowledge how much work went into negotiating with landowners and all that preliminary work that is not normal to the street work that we do, right? It's kind of a new, and it was heavy, and it involved a lot of parties, and it's a significant road to put in where there is not currently a road. And so there was just many phases to this project that are not typical of what we do. And so I just want to acknowledge, and I know that everyone else would want to too, how much work went into this to get us even to this point, that it already feels like it's been a complete project, but we're really just getting started. So thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate that, Sarah, especially working with the Lions, and Steve Skinner, Ethan Manuel, and Hank Jarbo. They were all just great to make, that takes a group like that to make this happen, so.
For sure.
Thanks for that.
Perfect. Any other comments?
I have another question.
Oh, yes, please.
This was presented to us without an emergency clause, which I'm a fan of, as you know, but it is listed here as an option. It would accelerate performance. What would it actually give us? Anything?
days.
It would give us 30 days to.
We wanted to put that in there for you, Tracy.
You just did that for me.
Because I told the mayor
You're
no.
a stinker.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's 30 days, 30 days. If it was gonna give me like 6 months quicker, I might be on it, but I'm good with the way it's written. Sure. Put it in there for you.
We'll be all right.
Okay.
All right.
I trust you, Jerry.
So we have a motion on the table. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That carries 6-0. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Can I just make a quick comment now that, thank you for, again, for supporting that action and moving that forward. We're really excited to get to work, but I just did want to note, We will be bringing you updates as we move through the design. I would foresee perhaps a work session, a progress report of some type to show you the design before we make anything final. So I just wanted to let you know that we're anticipating doing that with you.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Next ordinance is 1574, an ordinance amending Camby's Title 16 of the Canby Municipal Code, adding newly created code chapter 16.1, middle housing model ordinance, and modifying existing chapters 16.04 definitions, 16.58 lot line adjustment, 16.60 partitions, and 16.68 subdivisions, final procedures, and recordation, and 16.89 application and review procedures. And it looks like Don is ready to go.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. Good evening. Before you tonight, we have a number of items that we're calling low-hanging fruit to update our code. We're kind of sequentially chipping away at the code as we can get to those items that are fairly easy to address without a holistic change of our code overall. And there are some holistic code changes that do need to happen. Those will be addressed really more in terms of when we get to our comp plan and transportation system plan updates. We'll be dealing with things like parking and those other issues that are larger scale issues and that'll take more analysis. But before you tonight, I just wanted to present a few items. I thought if it's okay with you all, I'd go through a quick staff report without a lot of detail, and then I'd go into the actual code change text if that works for you all. So I'll just start out, and I'll try to keep this pretty brief without, any kind of boring elements here. So, because this is not all that exciting sometimes, but to us it is. But so I will go ahead and start away.
Good Patton's here to do some dances with us.
I'm going to start away.
So we were going to essentially address a few items here, just clicking them off. Pre-application processes in 16.04514. The main issue there is that pre-application processes don't have a termination date in terms of the conference itself, and we'd like to include a one-year expiration for pre-application conferences. So if someone has a pre-application meeting, they're good for a year. That's pretty typical in most jurisdictions. There are problems when it goes beyond a year. That information becomes dated and our code sometimes changes, and so that's the item there. The other item is just clarification in our definitions as well, that pre-application conferences are for type 2, 3, and 4 applications, not type 1, which is essentially administrative. We could voluntarily do a type 1, but essentially we think 2, 3, and 4 are the ones that really require more analysis. Second one, item is 1658, and it seems like a fairly detailed piece here, but we'd like to adjust the code to address property line adjustments, because that's how ORS 92 addresses them. Oregon Revised Statutes addresses them by property line versus lot line, so just a change there. The other piece that we'd like to address is that boundary line or property line adjustments currently require a type 2 process, which requires notice to adjacent properties. Property line adjustment does not provide any entitlements for construction, and so therefore it has non-discretionary review elements. It causes some consternation when we send out advertisements for property owners, and people, we just say they're adjusting a property line. There's no development happening here, and I think it would just be better to treat them as a type 1 without notice, because essentially we're not giving any authorizations for development there. And that's pretty typical in most jurisdictions. You don't usually notice a boundary line adjustment or a property line adjustment. And the next one is recording, final procedures for recording of land divisions, partitions, and subdivisions. Our current code allows a 2-year window after you've received approval, with 1-year extension on that to complete your recorded subdivision. The state law actually allows 10 years for that, and so there's kind of a gap between the two, and oftentimes large multi-phase developments take more than 2 years to complete, and so There's a lot of work involved in those, and for the applicant to go back through and have to repeat that process yet again, it seems like it would be fairer to extend that time frame to something more reasonable. I'll go into the details of that, but essentially we are going to propose 4 years for plats and subdivisions, single phase, and 6 years for multi-phase subdivisions. With a 1-year extension on those, still less than 10 years, but I think more reasonable, and I think gives the applicant the ability to have a longer term situation there. And that timeframe can be really essentially at your discretion, but it feels like we should be giving more than 2 years. The other item that we were going to cover tonight is, just mention that. So again, we talked about boundary line adjustments already, or property line adjustments, and that was already covered. Public hearing processes, we are going to cover that tonight as well. Work closely with Chair Padden and the Planning Commission. There was some expression of concern about how long hearings were going, and they were extending fairly lengthy. And procedurally, some of that was due to the fact that staff was going first. It's in our code that we go first. That's not normal. In most jurisdictions, the applicant goes first and the burden of proof is on the applicant. And so that we're switching that up. We're proposing to switch that up so the applicant goes essentially first in the presentation. Staff would give a very brief introduction of the project, but we would not give a 45-minute presentation. It also gives the appearance that staff is the applicant, which is not the case, although that's the perception. So I think the burden of proof is on the applicant, and we would like to put the burden of proof on the applicant, and so therefore we would like that order to change, and I'll go through the details on that. Appeals is another item, and the Planning Commission had a lot of discussion around this, and this has to do with remands. So let's say the Planning Commission denies something, it comes to you, you guys remand it back to the Planning Commission, and they would like to add another finding that gives a little bit more character to what the issue is in terms of that. There's another criteria that they'd like to add, which essentially is one that doesn't place all the blame on them for a decision. I'm just kind of characterizing this. And so that will be another item. This has been vetted by our council as well. And so we'll go through and show you the exact language on that. On appeals, the other item we are going to cover is the remand process, which is not fully clear in our code that the council has that authority. And so we're going to make it clear that the council does have that authority. Then finally, on the model ordinance piece, this has to do with House Bill 2001. This is the legislation that the state legislature has already essentially adopted. Our focus here tonight is to talk about the guiding principles in our code to add that in so it's very clear as to what the regulatory framework is for that. If someone were to apply for that, even though that law has been in place for about a year, there have been no applications in the city of Canby. Doesn't mean they're not going to be, but we wanted to cover that as well. So there's clear and objective standards so that you guys understand what those are, and we're putting those in our code to make it clear. So going through just the content here, go into pre-application conferences. And so this is the language we're planning to add. The pre-application conference applications may be required for type 2, 3, and 4 applications. Pre-application meeting reports prepared by the city shall expire 1 year after the pre-application conference meeting. So that's our first change. The next change is going to be under the Chapter 1658, property line adjustments. And this, the definitional piece kind of gets back to the statute, so we're referencing that under 1658 010. Per Oregon Revised Statute 92-10-12, property line adjustment means a relocation or elimination of all or a portion of the common property line between abutting properties that does not create an additional lot or parcel. And then kind of permeating that whole process, that just kind of defines it and recharacterizes that section. And then also property line adjustments, we're proposing them to be a type 1 process with no notice as an administrative process. And again, these are just really consistency here items about using the word property instead of lot line pursuant to the Oregon Revised Statute. The county assessor shall be notified that property line adjustments will not result in the creation of additional legal lot, we added that in, or parcel of record, because you're not able to create lots by boundary line adjustment. You can only essentially maintain the lots you have. Those lots also need to meet dimensional standards when you adjust them. So,
John,
yeah.
so, do you mind if I ask questions?
Yeah, please do. I'm kind of speeding through this, so please, yeah.
So going back to the lot line and property line piece, was that been, and it's tightening up language obviously, but has that been something that's been an issue in some of the planning commission hearings?
It has not been, because these are type 2, so the planning commission actually does not see these, but we've had folks that have been very concerned as adjacent neighbors, and it's very difficult to explain that nothing is happening. They're just adjusting boundaries. I mean, the development activity that subsequently comes will be noticed. I think it creates the perception that like somehow we're hiding something, when the reality is they're just adjusting a boundary.
Your Honor, I could give you an example that you would understand, which is, remember when we had that beak as part of our property that was out in, the industrial park, and that beak really, if you cut it off, it made more sense to be with the neighbor anyway, and they wanted that extra little bit. And they called it a beak because that was the shape of it, but it was literally just slicing off an odd shape, making it actually closer to what it should have been. And so that would be a perfect case where instead of getting all your neighbors riled up and having to go within 200 feet and post it and do all those sorts of things, that would just simply be something that you did, which would have no real legal recourse except to make this lot slightly different with the beak shape and this lot more square. Yeah.
My question to that would be, if you do a lot line adjustment, or a property line adjustment, is it usually done in order to create a buildable parcel to avoid setback issues?
Really, essentially, if the adjustment process meets the code, I mean, you can adjust properties, but you cannot like make an unbuildable lot or essentially make something and adjust it to be non-conforming with the code. So, I mean, arguably, you could make a lot more buildable that perhaps has challenges with that. I think that would be extremely unusual in Canby.
What do you typically see? The purpose of those?
I think what you see is either a lot consolidation situation where you're actually merging two lots together. We see a lot of that in the industrial area. You also see adjustments where maybe they're trying to adjust it so that the home site has a little less property and they're selling off an excess piece. Okay. So it would be something like maybe more like an infill, where there's a home that like does still meet the setback requirements for that home, but they're tightening it up, and then they have excess property that they want to put another home on that.
And to follow up on that point, so if somebody was, say, you can't create a new tax lot, right, in this, using this process. So say you were going to shrink one down ever so slightly to make one bigger, there would be notification if this bigger one was going to be something that they were going to build, because then you would have to go through the development process to do it anyway. So the idea of not giving people notice on this portion of it doesn't mean that if there was going to be subsequent building that people wouldn't get all sorts of notice.
And that's a great point, Joe. I think the other piece is that we, in the industrial side of things, for example, or even in a subdivision, I mean, we've actually kind of forced the hand, and it does become combined in those situations where sometimes a lot line or property line adjustment, it's part of the overall large application that is just folded into it. part of that is we can't authorize a building to cross a property line either. So there's another issue there as well. And so a case came up recently in the industrial park where they were unaware, the applicant was unaware, and we actually went to the county surveyor's office and asked, are these legal lots? And they said, yes, they are. And the applicant wasn't aware of it. And so we don't want a building crossing the lines, that causes all kinds of problems. So it's another, and so we asked them to fold that into their application. Any other questions? Okay. So I'm going to move on to the next section. And this is partitions, and this is a suggested language, again, dealing with that there's 10 years to record a plat in state of Oregon from the time of initial approval. We're suggesting that for single-phase partitions, which is 3 and fewer, and subdivisions 4 or more, that you are allowed 4 years from that original approval. Multiple phase subdivisions are going to be allowed 6 years from that original approval, and then the planning director may approve a single 1-year extension beyond that, beyond those stated in that process. And that again gives a little more latitude. Part of this is, I think this gives more time. I don't think we're normally seeing things that go on indefinitely, but I think 2 years is just too short. That's just not, we're seeing that, and I think it's also really difficult to track that. The applicants are not always tracking that. We're not always tracking that. It just creates confusion, I think, in the current code. Same with the subdivision process, and you'll see consistency between the two. So we use the same language for single phase subdivisions, and partitions are allowed again 4 years from the original approval with a 1-year extension, and multiple phase subdivisions would be allowed 6 years with a 1-year extension. And so those are, again, the continuity is between the two versus the current situation. And so again, that would come to the planning director for recognition of that, and would have to be provided a good cause, which essentially would be that that there's not something that would obviously cause a conflict with that, but I think in most circumstances, we're not going to see code changes that are dramatic there. The next section of the code, this is something under 1668040 that staff has started to implement. We'd like to codify this, and this is during the final plat process. So when somebody actually goes through the preliminary plat approval process, there's probably 40 or more conditions of approval. Very important that the applicant, when they submit the application materials, that we know how are they complying with those 40 conditions of approval. That's really not the burden of staff, that's the burden of the applicant. So we're asking for a narrative to accompany the application, explaining why and how and when, the sequencing and the timing of all that's going to happen. Versus individual, sheets of paper coming across our counter. We get a composite application with everything in it all at once. And so it's really better for the applicant. It's better for us. Applicants should really technically know how they're complying. Historically, it's been kind of the opposite direction, and staff has kind of played that role, which I don't think is appropriate, and I don't think most jurisdictions do it that way. So I think we'd rather have them, as the applicant, provide the narrative so they can explain how they're meeting all the conditions of approval, and then we'll review that. The next item is applications and review procedures. And this again goes into the property line adjustments, removing the type 2 process and making it a type 1, also removing the 100-foot notification process. Again, from what we discussed previously, that there are no development approvals that are happening there with the property line adjustment, and those would become subsequent if they were to happen, and they would be noticed at that point. Next section is going to be, this is the procedural process, and our recommendation again on this to change this up is, again, currently when you look at under EC, that would be removed. E1C, the staff report shall be made followed by questions of any of the staff by the hearing body. So we are proposing to remove that and actually change up the order. So the public hearing shall be opened and testimony shall be received in the following order. Staff would provide a brief introduction of the project, no more than 5 minutes as suggested. Then the applicant would have their presentation, 20 minutes as suggested. They currently have 15. Proponents would have 3 minutes each, and we would strive and suggest that a collective no more than 15 minutes be for proponents. Same with opponents. They would be given 3 minutes each and would suggested that 15 minutes be provided equally. Rebuttal would be by proponents or applicant, 10 minutes each suggested. And then questions of staff and the applicant. Councilor Spoon, did you have a question?
I'll let you finish because you
Yeah.
might answer my question.
Yeah, and then additional questions and discussions would happen, close the public hearing, and then additional questions and discussions would be limited to the record and testimony heard by the hearing body. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, if this is standard, I guess I would like to see that the applicant not have more time than people that object to that. I think that, for me, I would rather see equal time across the board. If the applicant has 20 minutes, but opponents only have a combined 15 minutes, that feels a little inequitable to me in terms of input on the project in a hearing. I would think that in a hearing, the applicant shouldn't have more time than everyone else, right? That there should be some equity in time. Am I?
Councilor Spoon, one of the reasons, though, that you might give more time to an applicant is because they have the burden of proof. So they're the ones who have to carry the day.
And that actually is currently the case now. It's 15 and they're given 15 and then it's 5, I believe, for proponents and opponents. So,
Right, but this would mean that basically no more than 5 people could oppose a project, right?
what's suggested, and again, we can manipulate the language. We're not holding fast to exactly how much that time is, and that could even be.
Could we maybe park this for discussion after he goes through the explanation? Because I'd like to see the input from other people.
Okay,
Yeah,
no, absolutely.
awesome.
I totally understand. And this is your purview. I think really the structure is really probably more important than the exact timing.
And to be clear, I love the structure. I love that staff is no longer carrying the burden. I really appreciate that you did that work. That's 10 out of 10. I think you'll get that from all of us. Really appreciate that change, for sure.
So, yeah, please.
Sorry, thanks, Don. And this may be more for Joe as well. So we're making the change here at the planning commission level, right, based on burden of proof on, how does this now carry over to council in the case of a public hearing piece? Can this, because
This
I
can
would like
apply-
to see this
yeah.
format carry through to what we do here in that case as well.
Yeah, if it's a type 3 appeal, you're supposed to follow the type 3 process, which this will become.
Okay.
And then if it's a type 4, it's a de novo, but really you follow ostensibly the type 3 process.
Okay.
But you decide whether or not you want to hear more information or not for a type 4. And that's like an annexation.
Sure, like usually I set that time in terms of what the applicant gets, what staff get, whatever.
Yeah.
But if I would like to see that carry all the way through and have that burden, because usually, again, when it's in front of us,
Yeah.
It's the planning department that's carrying the water for the project versus I like the 5 minute now, great, plead your case to us in that capacity, so.
And staff does also days worth of work putting together their actual reports and giving you their recommendations. So it really should be the person, the applicant bringing their story and how why Camby should let them do whatever they're asking to do.
Let me ask a question real quick, just for clarification. So the way this is written, and I understand what you were saying, and I think I agree with you on it, you're trying to limit proponents and opponents all combined to 15 minutes, correct?
It is suggested, and that language could be stricken, to be honest. I think part of it is we're just trying to, I think the biggest part of it is how much time is each proponent going to be given. That other part is really discretionary, and we're just trying to provide at least a discussion element here as to what that should be. And,
Yeah. I think, and Joe, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think that should be stricken. Because I think that we get into a situation of the First Amendment rights, people's ability and their rights to be able to discuss and oppose something. And if you get a very lengthy project that we have a lot of people in, and you limit it to 15 minutes, you only get a certain number of people, and then you prevent people from being able to share. And I think every citizen deserves the opportunity to share if they oppose a project. And so I think that we need to strike that out of there.
Well, and I will say this, it is a suggestion only, Counselor Varwig. It is a suggestion only, but I guess part of, I think, the planning department and the planning commission's mission in this regard was to create a culture where they try to do these meetings faster and streamline them in a way that suggests, hey, because oftentimes if you have people who are opponents, they do want to be heard, but it's almost one or two reasons on repeat. And so sometimes you wait around all night hearing the exact same. And sometimes if you create a culture where people are, okay, maybe we need to have one or two champions come up and share our time with them. And so I think that's why the suggestion exists there, but it doesn't mean that it's limited to that specifically.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I can appreciate that. I think that it puts us in a really bind if somebody wants to be the heavy, and if the chair decides I only want to give them 15 minutes to talk tonight, and I'm not going to let anybody else talk. I don't want people to be to not be able to have their voice heard, right? And so I can understand if that was, when people buy time from each other and one person represents a whole group, to limit that to 15 minutes. But I think most people should be given their opportunity. And maybe there's something in there where you can say, if it's a busy night, we limit it to 1 minute or 2 minutes or something, that you reduce the time. But I'm just not going to be in favor of limiting people, especially if it's just a suggestion, because then one time you limit to 15 minutes and the next time you let it go for 2 hours, it just becomes unfair, I think.
And I appreciate what you're saying entirely in terms of constitutionality, is that if you're going to give one person 1 minute, you can't give the next person 3 minutes. So maybe you do take a temperature of the room and go, oh, okay, there's 30 people who would like to be heard. Maybe it's time to lower that to 2 minutes per person or something.
Councilor Spoon?
Yeah, I understand the spirit of it. My concerns are kind of twofold with what I'm hearing now, and that's one, agree that every citizen should have the right in a public hearing. It's a public hearing; the public should be heard. Right? Every public person should have a right to speak equitably. But my other concern is that I don't like the idea that the burden is on the public to organize and find champions. And I don't think that's a fair burden, because they may not know each other. They may not have an opportunity or a venue with which to organize to have a couple of champions. Whereas a business or an applicant can figure out the two people in the organization to come best represent their case. I don't think that's a fair burden to put on the public. So I could see leaving it to the chair of the hearing to determine how many minutes per person should be allowed given the room. But my concern is not the length of the meeting as much as that every person that wants to be heard gets to be heard.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought was, do we add language to it that gives the chair or the ability to, as Joe said, take the temperature of the room and go, we need more than 15 minutes total, for everyone to say their piece, or even to be able to, because we've even had those meetings where it's like, okay, does anybody have anything different that hasn't already been said? Are you good, or do you still want to, come say your piece kind of thing? So I don't know if there's a way to tweak that, or if we just take that out, that language out entirely. That's
the other issue that you want to make sure to capture is, if somebody does want to speak in hearings, that's the way you get standing for appeal. So you actually do want to give everybody an opportunity to speak if they want to. Okay. It's just that suggested amount of time, I think, was trying to govern. If there's 15 people, maybe you bring it down, or maybe if there's 20 people, you bring the amount of minutes down.
Well, and the other thing is, it's hard to put the word suggested, I think, in code, because it leaves a whole lot of gray area and open to interpretation, and anybody can have a suggested amount of time, right? And so I think that's hard to
Suggested
codify.
lot line.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
And can I add that I'm not bothered if 20 people want to make the same argument. I think if there's clearly a bunch of people that have the same argument, that would tell a board this is something we need to take under consideration. So it doesn't bother me if 10 people want to give the same ding dang speech, but that's what matters to them. I think that having a plethora of people saying the same thing tells a board, if I haven't thought about this, this is something I need to think about. So just putting that out there.
Yes, I think that the one part I was just going to add to what Joe was saying, I think we absolutely can not have a maximum here. I think part of the chair's role, though, is in fact to, when you see hearings examiners, which is more normal in communities that do a lot of hearings, that person gives a pretty specific speech. He or she gives a very specific speech at the beginning about repeated testimony and those kinds of things. And again, I think it's important for people to speak, but I also think that sometimes it is important to have more organization to the content as well, so it doesn't go into the wee hours. That was part of the Planning Commission's maybe drive in some ways as well, as to be able to get through at least 2 hearings an evening, and sometimes those take a long time. Those could be 4 hours or more going through a hearing process of just so that we can continue to get through those.
Don, I think if you put the wording in there as proponents and opponents up to 3 minutes each, that gives the chair of the board an opportunity to say, we're going to go down to 1 minute at this meeting. It's only up to you, because I think once you put it in code, people start reading that, they go, we have 3 minutes, right?
And I'm totally fine with it.
Yeah, and so if you put up to 3 minutes, it gives the chair an opportunity to adjust that number, and then also gives them the opportunity to say, if there's a bunch of people that think the same way, and kind of maybe give that suggestion of, see if your neighbor thinks that, is here to talk the same way as you, and maybe, people start saying, I don't need to talk, he's talking for me.
And are you also strike the maximum?
Yeah. And strike the maximum, yeah. So I would just say proponents up to 3 minutes each. Okay. And leave it right there, same opponents. Gotcha. And again, in the rebuttal, up to 10 minutes. Yep. And take out the word suggested.
Yep. I think those are great suggestions. So.
I'll try to take notes on this so that if you want to pass this as amended, we'll make sure that those get in for the second reading.
Any other comments on this section or questions?
No, I don't think so, Don. That was good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next section is going to be, this is the section on appeals. Under 3, the city council shall overturn, and this is added language, or remand the decision of the planning commission only when one or more of the following findings are made. So A, B, and C are already in code. Typically, what we're seeing is C is the factor that essentially is the planning commission's burden, because it usually is the planning commission makes a denial, goes to council, council remands it back to planning commission, and then C is usually chosen. And that says that the commission did not adequately consider all the information which was pertinent to the case. The Planning Commission felt very strongly that that is not really an accurate portrayal of the situation always. And they believe that the commission, under what they're adding, the commission did not receive correct or complete information in the original application as a more accurate portrayal of that than C, which they're seeing as kind of like they're being blamed for the situation as to why it was denied to begin with.
Councilor Parker.
I was hoping I wouldn't have to delay this further, but this really is the issue that we faced last time, if I understand it, that an appellant came in, a business came in, asked for planning commission approval. It was denied. It was appealed to us. I think I was the one who said, we've got new information. I don't want to adjudicate new information. That's the role of the planning commission. I think I understand this language, but Don, what happens when the new language is language that is aimed at the reasons for denial? That's what I'm not quite certain of. That
Clarifier,
yeah, that it seems. I mean, I can understand where a person would come in and they've learned some new information. But in the most recent case, it really was bringing to the city council information that addressed the objections of the planning commission. I'm not sure that's more complete information. It really seems like almost a rebuttal. And maybe this is too theoretical, but this is really the granular issue that I was trying to get to. And even taking this out of this, of if there wasn't an administrative way, instead of having it go to the city council and then back to the planning commission, that if the planning commission does make a denial and the applicant does come up with additional information, to return to the planning commission, because it's been the policy of this council in those situations to automatically remand it. So I don't know if there's a mechanism for doing it, but that's the thing that I was trying to solve. Is you come in, you make an application, planning commission says no, here's 2 reasons why, then you appeal it to the city council and saying, okay, well, here's some additional information that we didn't tell the planning commission. Maybe we generated new information specifically for that. Goes back to the planning commission. The applicant doesn't like the time delay between the time that they appeal, it gets before us, and then has to go back to the planning commission.
Counselor Parker?
Please.
There is an avenue for this, but sometimes the applicant has missed the boat on it. And so we've done a bit of training on the actual hearings, the quasi judicial hearings, but there is an avenue and hopefully if they're represented applicants, they read the tea leaves and go, oh wait, it looks like I'm probably going to have to ask to leave the record open so that I can add more information. And there is an avenue to do that, or to even reopen the hearing. But we have ran into some not so savvy applicants and they don't do that, and then you're only then left with your appeal.
I now remember that in the past where we have had well-represented applicants whose final words were, couldn't we leave the record open? So, okay, well then in that case, I think we have a method. We may need some additional coaching, but this is fine for me, Don, thanks.
Yeah, great to your point, and I like that, and that I think can fall to staff as well. It would seem that from a customer service perspective, that if we think that there might be that kind of all of a sudden landmine field that they're going through where this may end up getting wonky for them, that we can say, actually, there's a way that we can, I mean, again, I'm still want to keep the customer service component piece, still keep it legal, still keep it moving forward, where if like you're saying oh gosh, well, no, we didn't provide that information, but we can get it, and okay, we'll see you in 2 weeks or a month or whatever to keep that going versus this jockeying back and forth. But I mean, we have a process for.
I forgot about that, yeah.
So.
It wasn't used last time, so that's why.
Yeah, I mean, we have, up until recently, we've heard new information, and I guess that is something that, I guess, as I don't know if we want that codified in the code or not, to say, if new information is brought forward at the appeal, then we're just automatically going to remand it. We don't want to adjudicate new information or new information that may support this one item versus sending it back. So, and I think if there's that way to make that kind of a circular without wasting too much of their time. Councilor Spoon?
So one of the things that I have seen in my time on city council is applicants that make significant change to the application between the time it's at planning commission and the time we see it. And I just wanted to take this as my opportunity to say, I don't expect it tonight, but as we're going through the code, I would really love some language around at what point that becomes a new application because of the significant amount of staff time that's taken. And when you make significant change to an application, at some point it's really a new application and it doesn't represent the initial application, but they don't pay another application fee, but they take up twice as much staff time. So because that's something we've seen and it's been part of the reason we have remanded in the past, I would just love to see in the future as you're working on the code some language around what triggers a new application as opposed to
What's the threshold?
yeah, what's that threshold really that something becomes a new application as opposed to an amended application? Because I think we have seen some people that are savvy enough to take advantage of that opportunity when really their application was bad to begin with. It should have been denied. And then they just edit the existing application into a whole new project.
I don't want to say bad, maybe just incomplete.
Not up to code.
There we go.
Yes.
And Councilor Spoon, and this is a great conversation here. I think the marrying between this section and the applicant going first essentially is a critical change philosophically. And part of that reason to put the applicant first is to make them more aware of the situation and not sit back and say, well, you know, staff has this and they're driving it. A lot of applicants are not savvy to like listening to the planning commission, and I would really personally much rather have a continuance than a denial and then back to you guys with a whole bunch of additional information and then back to the planning commission. But I think your point is a good one about, like, I think part of that is this essentially folks need to step their game up as applicants here, which is the standard everywhere else in the metro area. I mean, it just is. And I think part of it is there's not a whole lot of opportunity or before you end up in a, you know, LUBA situation. You don't have a lot of remedies in Oregon. And so I think part of that is people need to take that seriously and say, you know, essentially I only have so much, discretion.
And just for anyone paying attention, LUBA is the Land Use Board of Appeals. It would be after something is appealed to City Council, if it gets appealed again, it goes there.
Yeah. So, yeah, good point, though.
And there is a place in our code for modifications of applications once there's some finality to them, or developments, right? So it is odd that they use the appeal process to try to skate around when literally if you got finality, you could go back and ask for a modification. Subsequently, if it's intermediate or major, you still have to go back through the planning commission anyway. But there are processes, even if you get kind of an answer that you're not that satisfied with in the aftermath, to maybe go back. But this appeal process should be a little more pure. It should be based on a record down below that is exactly what it is, and then you're just basing your decision on that record. And so that's what this attempts to do.
I will add too, because Chair Patton and I had that conversation about, I think it's item D, or in blue, the CD, the commission did not receive correct or complete information. That almost sometimes ends up where it seems like the council blames the planning commission for not maybe doing their due diligence when actually they did. And so I like that language is put in there because that if they didn't receive complete information, then that's almost an automatic go back to go and start over, in terms of that piece. So I like that language being added to it as well.
I only had one that I can remember, but clearly they just didn't interpret it right because they didn't want to. I won't name names, but we went back and forth for years on a very hefty book of paper.
Yeah.
That's the only time I can think of that really it was the commission just didn't make the appropriate choice based on the criteria.
Well, and I think that goes back to staff driving it, not the applicant driving it. And that should have been an applicant driving it, not, and so that
Yeah, that piece right
this
there is a
language
big.
changes up.
Yeah.
This is going to help.
Yeah.
I think, Brian, too, this is a good reminder when we remand something to make it clear, because we do this all the time and we're used to the language, how other people might perceive it, that I can't think of a time we remanded because we didn't think planning commission did their job or whatever. But it's upon us to communicate that, because someone watching our hearings doesn't understand the nuance of the code, and it's a good reminder to do that.
piece.
Yeah. Because I think our commission donates a lot of time to the city, and it behooves us to make sure they know they're appreciated.
Perfect. Any other-
And just one final point. Our staff reports will probably not get any smaller. There'll be a lot of reliance on those. So they're already fairly hefty. So that's part of this, though, is essentially that in the part kind of back to the previous section, staff will summarize the staff report, but we'll be citing it, but there'll still be significant detail in that to allow the applicant to take that as an opportunity to, in their presentation, to take that forward, but it really will be on them to explain that. And then there's one last section, which is kind of the conclusionary piece on the remands under section 4, which is an add that council may choose to remand decisions to the planning commission if new information is presented that was not part of the original planning commission record. That is not currently in code. So it's a little bit ambiguous as to whether or not council has that authority, even though that's happened repeatedly. We'd like to add that in.
Great. Good work, John. Yeah, good job.
So that's that section. And then the next section, there's a couple small things here. This is the appeal period, and these are kind of hard to read under C and D. State law actually allows a 12-day process. The applicant or person aggrieved of an affected by a decision may file a request for a hearing to the city planning department within 120 days. Within 12 days of the decision versus 10 days. So the state law is actually 12 days. And so we're changing that to be consistent with state law, that there's a 12-day process. There's a 12-day period for appeals versus 10.
There's a line through the 0.
And that's under D as well.
We are just saying that there's a line through the 0. It looks to me like 120.
Yeah,
But there's a line through it, okay.
It is not, I was reading it also incorrectly, but it is
It's 12.
days.
Okay.
We see that.
So
Sorry, Don, is that now 12 business
Business days?
or calendar days?
That's a good question.
It's calendar.
Okay.
Yeah.
thank you, Joe. The next section is middle housing, and this is a new section that we're proposing to add in. Again, kind of a little bit of a history on this is that the Oregon legislature adopted House Bill 2001. It essentially became effective in July 2021. If a jurisdiction did not become even more liberal in the way they're applying this. And so there's a model ordinance that jurisdictions have the ability to say, okay, we're going to just accept what the state has given us, and that is the bare minimum regulatory piece of this. If you want to go and make a change to that, and other jurisdictions in the metro area have done that, it's going to be even more aggressive in terms of allowing more density, et cetera. You cannot have less than what the state is required. So the purpose of this is to basically, on staff's part, is to kind of summarize the applicability, the review procedures of what that means in our code. And essentially, we need to treat single-family developments or a duplex on a lot that's zoned for a single-family home the same way with the same standards. That's essentially what the law basically says. The premise behind this is the state legislature is looking at this as a housing affordability item, even though Canby, we've not seen one application for this in the city at this point. But it is the law, and so we're just simply trying to put a code section in here that essentially gives some parameters around this as to how this applies. So the model ordinance is not the easiest thing to read, and I'm going to page through that after we go through this section. So it just felt like we needed to have something in our code to summarize what these provisions mean. Basically on maximum density, you can either have a home, single-family home, or a duplex, but you're not allowed to. Essentially, you've got that combination. You can have no more than 2 dwelling units on a lot. Setbacks, excuse me, setbacks are very similar to existing code, with the exception that under the state model ordinance, there is a 15-foot rear yard setback. That would apply for a home, single-story home in the single-family zone, but a 2-story home would actually have a 20-foot setback. But the state model ordinance requires a 15-foot setback. Minimum lot size is the same standard that already applies. There is another provision that's coming out of the Oregon State Legislature that was adopted, Senate Bill 458. I'm not going to go into detail with that tonight, but we will likely have another set of guiding principles back again, meaning that if a duplex is created on a lot, there is going to be the ability, as of July 1, 2022, to divide that property in half. So you have individual homes that essentially you could split that in 2. That's another item that the legislature or Senate has actually adopted, which will become effectively law, and so we'll need another set of guiding principles around those. Standards for a duplex are identified in the R1, R15, and the CR zone. The standards that apply there are going to be the same design standards would apply. Building height is the same standards as applies in current code. Impervious surface is the same as it applies in code. If there's a duplex development on a single family lot, there is no parking requirement according to the state law. Utilities are the same standard, and so are frontage improvements. There are other clear and objective standards that apply as well. This has nothing to do with waiving any fire code standards. Those would apply. Utility standards would apply. So this essentially is a way of kind of just providing that guidance that we think is important, as if we get these applications, to make it clear what the development standards are. This is the model ordinance here, which is a little less easy to understand, but essentially what we've done is we've tried to memorialize what that all means. And it goes through and shows different configurations of houses. And that's kind of, if there's questions on that, I'm glad to answer those. But essentially, yeah, this is something that's kind of been provided to cities by the legislature, and we don't have any really way of objecting to it.
This, Don, I think a project that was probably very near and dear to most of our hearts up here was a project being done on Pine with some setbacks and land swap kinds of things that opened up a lot of questions and like we've obviously got holes that we need to get filled kind of thing, right? This to me seems like we might have to go through a couple of these as we'll say a litmus test to figure out, what are the holes, how does it relate to Camby, what do we need to tighten up, et cetera, until we see one or two, it's hard, reading through it and even reading through the, having conversation with other mayors about this when it was being proposed. It was just, we all are just kind of shaking our head going, how does that work? But in Portland, it's occurring, right? They're taking down, older homes and dividing the home, or they're tearing down the entire house and building a duplex or a triplex or whatever. And so I think it's just gonna be one of those things in this section that we're gonna have to kind of go through it to figure out what we need to change or
what would need to change and how can we based on state regs, so, yes, Counselor Spoon.
Yeah, this is a time when I think it would be nice if everyone that makes law at some point sat on a planning commission or a city council and understood the trickle-down impact of policy. But my question about this, understanding that we can't change it, that it is what it is, but just so I can better understand it, is if there is enough application in a single area where, say there's an established neighborhood, infrastructure was designed with a certain number of residents in mind, there is a threshold where the number of applications might put too much pressure on the infrastructure, the sewer and water system, the streets, et cetera. Is there a provision that allows us to stop allowing development when those infrastructure thresholds are met, as like we can with annexations? We can say no more annexing, like we don't have a pump station to facilitate this. Does a similar provision exist here?
Great question, and there's been many, many conversations with Department of Land Conservation and Development. I'm on there's a kind of a rote, about every 6 weeks or so, they have these calls that we are on DLCD and Camby, we're representing the city on those. And there's probably, 20 to 30 other cities that are on those calls. And so the answer is there's clear and objective standards that would prevent what you're talking about. This really is intended for infill. The question of the day is, you can kind of get carried away here saying that, if someone were to be real crazy and did a subdivision and withheld the fact that they were going to be doing duplex development, that's a game changer. At that point, the rules no longer apply as a vested situation.
And there's no provision to stop that from happening in theory?
it would be a major modification. It would have to go back to the hearings process.
Yeah.
Essentially, you can't go and switch, bait and switch and come back and say, okay, now we have all this additional traffic.
Right.
That was not a factor before. We have all this additional water and sewer issues that are demanding on that. That is not what the intent of this is. Right. Although the legislature, because they don't understand development, the cities had to kind of walk through that and say, is that a possibility?
So if a developer did that, it would be with enough time for us to adjust and modify the infrastructure required to facilate that development.
I think they would be starting over, and we're going to be advising people.
A new application.
At pre-application, if you're suggesting that you're going to do that, you need to tell us up front what that is, because it will have a bearing on everything else that's going on.
Yeah.
That's a lot different than a lot that's an existing legal lot in a single-family residential area, somebody putting a duplex on that property. That's what this is really more the intention of, but it's not super clear on how broad that is. But even DLCD, because they were in the last conversations that were asked, people were getting into those issues that what is the intent here? A lot of jurisdictions do, like the more urban areas in the Portland metro area, and they're different. Their densities are different. They're promoting that actually, and so they've gone even beyond the standard here. So they've taken this and even gone further with that.
And I think part of my question is the threshold for how big those zones are is dependent on the population of the city, right? So as the community grows, we will hit different zoning thresholds over time that allow for more dense development. And I understand it's not going to happen with 1, 2, 5, even 10 applications, but we have to write our policy for, at times, the worst case scenario, not the best case scenario. So just trying to keep in mind as we think through this, what that looks like.
Well, the other thing to keep in mind is they have gone back and changed the law recently and added to it. They may do that again, which may be helpful or may be harmful, depending on which side of things you're on. But as we get to watch places like Eugene and Portland grapple with this more because they're allowing more, we can learn from those things and bring those things back to you to maybe codify our own, maybe slightly more protectionistic restrictions around these sorts of things.
Do either of you know what the next population threshold is when we go from
25,000?
Okay, so we're not too awful far away from having to go to the next level of density.
Okay. Yeah, and that actually, I mean, it's about 1.3% growth, which is not really super high is what we're looking at. And so in the comp plan, I mean, we will be forecasting that 20-year population to be around 26,000. It's about 19 now. So that's the next round, yeah.
Great.
That was the last thing that I had on my my list. We will be trying to bring other low-hanging fruit code items before you all, trying to chip away at those as we can. And so this will not be the last time we'll be before you, but if there are questions, happy to answer those on anything we've talked about tonight.
Is there any other questions or comments?
Thank you, Don. This is exactly what we asked for.
Yeah, thank you, Don, appreciate it. Thanks to the planning commission as well for getting after it. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion. I move to adopt ordinance 1574, an ordinance amending Camby's Title 16 of the Canby Municipal Code, adding newly created Chapter 16.81 Middle Housing Model Ordinance, and modifying existing Chapter 16.04 definitions 16.58 lot line adjustments, 16.60 partition, 16.68 subdivision, and final procedures and recordation, and 16.89 applications and review procedures in the title to come up for second reading on June 1st, 2022, as amended during discussion.
Okay, well done, thank you.
Second.
The motion's been made by Councilor Varwick and seconded by Council President Hensley to approve ordinance 1574, an ordinance amending Camby's Title 16 of the Canby Municipal Code, adding newly created Chapter 16.81 Middle Housing Model Ordinance, and modifying existing Chapter 16.04 definitions, 16.58 lot line adjustment, 16.60 partitions, 16.68 subdivision and final procedures and recordation, and 16.89 application and review procedures in the title to come up for second reading June 1st, 2022, as amended in discussion. Any further comments or questions or dialogue? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That carries 6-0.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don, appreciate it.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Jason.
Final ordinance and resolution tonight is,
May I just speak on this agenda item real quick?
yes, you can, sir. Do you have a little yellow card?
I can fill one out and get it
just
to you.
kidding.
Okay. So
I will
Jason,
give you grace as the planning commission chair.
thank you. So Jason Padden, 1040 North Birch Street here in Canby. I'm here as the planning commission chair. I just wanted to thank you for your time for that tonight. And let you know that this is one of many, as Don had mentioned, one of many things that will be coming across the dais for you to review probably over the next 4 years. This is going to take some time. And while the Planning Commission puts a lot of work into it and is really beating the drum, much of the credit needs to go to Don, Ryan, Brianna, and the other members of the Planning Department staff. They are the ones that really do the heavy lifting in all of this. And as a planner, I can speak on behalf of all the planning commissioners to say that they are doing a fantastic job, and we appreciate them. So that's that.
Thank you, Jason. Next up on the agenda is resolution number 1365, declaring acquisition of rights-of-way easements, fee property for South Ivy intersection.
And
Joe.
Yeah, I can take this, Mr. Mayor. So this is a resolution that the county is actually asking us to consider. It dovetails with our Ivy Street paving and sidewalk project that we are partnered up with them in. And one of the issues is there are places along the way, mostly around the signalization that they want to do, but also around some of the sidewalks, where it's technically a little sliver of city property, and it's actually in your packet, like where those places are. So you're only giving permission, if you consider and approve this resolution, to allow them to go and bargain in good faith and negotiate and appraise and ultimately pay for those properties that are laid out, enumerated in your packet. And that is a last ditch effort, is the eminent domain. The ongoing assumption, and it's baked into this language, is that they have to deal in good faith, they have to negotiate, they have to appraise, they have to do all of those sort of friendly things first. But at the end of the day, if that is necessary for them to acquire that right of way for the project, then they wanted us to give them that ultimate approval, because it is technically our jurisdiction, those certain slivers. And so they needed to get that from us. In our IGA, we have taxed them with the duty of grabbing all of the necessary right of way. It turned out that some of that necessary right of way is city property. And so we technically have to give them permission to do up and including eminent domain, although we don't suspect that will be an issue.
So if I'm hearing you correctly in what you've just explained to us, Joe, that we are giving the county permission for them to hit us with eminent domain.
Basically, well, yes.
Yes, you can say yes, it's okay.
Yeah, well, and here's the deal, because we have
to give them permission.
We have overlapping political subdivisions, right?
I know.
So we're a state, and then we have counties, and then we have our city. And so what's nice about having them do this is they have to acquire their portion of right-of-way anyway. And if a sliver more is ours, we would rather have their council and their bargaining people and their appraisers go out and actually do all of the work in one bundle. And then we don't necessarily have to be a bad guy.
This project is so many years in the making. We've been able to move faster on Walnut Street than this project's been able to get done. To me, like, yes, then let's work out a fair market value deal and get this done so we can get going on this project. This was supposed to be done 3 years ago.
Yes.
So, yeah. I'll be using a walker on Ivy Street by the time this is done, so.
Brian, I think our high school seniors were in elementary school when we started discussing
I
this.
think you were correct in that, yes, so.
Well,
What? Let's go. You have heartburn?
when you talk eminent domain and giving the county permission to do it, yeah, I have heartburn. Sorry.
They're the bigger bully?
They are the bigger bully. What did you call them before? County rats? And we're the little municipal mouse?
Yeah.
Record.
Glad you said that, not me. I have to see Commissioner Casabas next week, so, you know.
Well, he'll be happy because he's winning election though. No, I don't feel comfortable with that language. I'm sorry.
Do you have other language you'd like to propose?
I take condemnation out of there and I'm okay with it.
But I don't think that we can.
That's the point. That's what they're asking for, because in our IGA, we've taxed them with obtaining all of the necessary right-of-way. It just so happens if this is the amount of right-of-way, right, this is their share, but they might need this much more to make sure that they can put in well, if they're going to go through the whole process for this, please let them do this extra, if that makes sense.
To me, Council President Hensley, to me, like the condemnation actions, it's verbiage. I don't think we're going to get to that point in the conversation, but I think it's the legalese portion of something like this to get it done. So that's
I hear you. I
just
see
my
the writing
take
on the
from
wall. It's going to pass, but I'm going to vote
That's
for
what their
conscience
county
anyway.
council wants, yeah.
Councilor Spoon.
I think, and I know, I am not surprised. As soon as I saw condemnation, I thought, oh, if we're going to have a conversation about this on the dais, which is fair and valid, and that's why we're here. But I think it's important to remember that when we're talking about condemnation, it's not for, it's really for public safety. I mean, it's so we can put in sidewalks so kids can get to elementary school without getting hit by a car, is what it is. I mean, we have kids walking along that road with no sidewalks. And I will tell you, kindergartners, I watch them every morning, do not walk in a straight line, and they certainly don't always look where they're going. So this to me is condemnation for the sake of public safety, not for unjust cause or for just because. So that takes my heartburn away. It's to protect, really, in my mind, it's to protect kids on their way to school is the most important part of these sidewalks. So.
Well, as long as my no vote doesn't get translated in that I want kindergartners to get run over, that's all. I want them to be safe just as well.
You just don't like the condemnation?
I just don't like it.
It's just to give context for people that hear condemnation and don't, we haven't really talked about the scope of the project, so it's kind of really just to give context for what's happening there. No one thinks you want kids to get hurt.
Joe, so this is just, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're gonna go out and just take property, right? This is if they can't come to some kind of agreement, this gives them the authority to do it in order to make it happen, but they will, in good faith, try and
Yeah, it puts
purchase
them,
a
it puts them in the driver's seat as far as if somebody said, you know, so what, you can't take this, it's technically this sliver city, and tries to, you know, up the price to an unreasonable amount or something. What this does is kind of unties their hands a little bit in the negotiation. But it's also just something that they necessarily have to have in order to purchase all of the necessary right-of-way, because part of it is in our jurisdiction.
Okay, so when you say it's in our jurisdiction, is it city property or is it a property owner's?
It's not in the county right-of-way, because when they have that road, there's a certain amount that, you know, on the sides of the road that are county right-of-way. It goes a little bit outside of their jurisdiction, their right-of-way, into our city.
But the question is, it's not,
We
it's
don't own
not
the property
privately owned.
ourselves.
Okay,
It's
so
right
it's
of way,
privately
not
owned
land.
property in city jurisdiction.
But we're
Okay.
just allowing them to be, sit in our shoes in terms of, we would have the right of eminent domain if we really needed something and a property owner wouldn't let us pay market value for it.
Okay.
Close as I'll get.
Yeah, it very well may be, Councilor Berger. Okay, thank you, sir, I appreciate that. Is there any other questions for staff on this? If not, I'll take a motion if someone would so be inclined. If not, then I guess.
I will. I move to approve Resolution 1365, declaring the necessity and purpose for acquisition of rights-of-way easements and fee property and authorizing good faith negotiations and condemnation actions for the South Ivy Street intersection improvements project.
I'll second.
Motion's been made by Councilor Spoon and seconded by Councilor Parker to approve Resolution 1365, declaring acquisition of rights-of-way easements, fee property for South Ivy intersection, and authorizing good faith negotiations and condemnation actions by Clackamas County. Any further discussion or comments? All those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed?
Nay.
That passes 5-1. Next up is new business, and so these are appointments for our city budget committee. Our first appointment, that, and then a discussion regarding boards, commission, and committee member reappointments. So item A is appointment of Elizabeth Chapin to the budget committee with a term ending June 30th, 2024, which was moved from the consent agenda down here to new business for any possible discussion. Is there any question, comment, discussion at all?
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the appointment of Elizabeth Chapin to the Budget Committee with a term ending June 30, 2024.
Second.
Motion has been made by Council President Hensley and seconded by Councilor Spoon to appoint Elizabeth Chapin to the Budget Committee with a term ending June 30th, 2024. Any discussion, comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That carries 6-0. Next up is appointment of Hermann Maldonado to the Budget Committee with a term ending June 30th of 2022. Again, same situation here as the previous one. Any conversation or question?
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the appointment of Hermann Maldonado to the Budget Committee with the term ending June 30, 2022.
Second.
Motion made by Council President Hensley and seconded by Councilor Varway to appoint Hermann Maldonado to the Budget Committee with a term ending June 30th of 2022. Any other comment or discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That also passes 6-0. Next up is a discussion regarding boards, commission, and committee member appointments.
And so, again, looking at here is a discussion piece for us in terms of, are there pieces here that we want staff to look at, bring back to us? Is it warrant a work session for us here? So I'm looking here, it seemed to be Counselor Spoon, Counselor Parker, so I'll turn it over to you in that regards.
Yeah, I had some substantial notes given the hour. I'll just hit the highlights here. There was a convergence of a couple things a few weeks ago when we had a discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and thrilled that Councillor Varwig and Councillor Spoon are willing to work as a work group to come up with a broader policy. At the same time this was going on, we were having at the national level, a discussion about the Supreme Court and people who was going to be appointed and lifetime appointments. And when the staff report came out, I was kind of struck by the fact that in our current situation with our board and committee members, if a person continues to ask to be reappointed, it can be a lifetime appointment. That we have members of our boards and commissions who no member of the city council has ever vetted or voted on. That it has gone directly from reappointment to reappointment to reappointment. If I want to be on the city council again next year, I don't just get to go to the city clerk and say, hey, just put me on for next year. I have to be vetted, I have to go through it, and I think that model should be appropriate. And then the discussion about diversity and equity, if we have people who are willing to continue to serve term after term after term, and that's true of that entire committee, there will be no way for us to get women, minorities, people of diverse opinions and so on those boards and committees. So my proposal, low-hanging fruit, before we go into a bunch of other things, is that we ask staff to merely, every time that there is a term that has been expired, to announce it and post it. In other words, to treat a board member's conclusion the same way we treat it as a vacancy.
Okay. Counselor Spoon?
Yeah, for me, it's pretty simple because the policy already exists. Each position is either codified as a 3-year term or a 4-year term. My issue is that we don't treat them that way. We actually don't give anyone else the opportunity to apply for it when the term expires. What currently happens is the term is coming up to expire. If the existing board or committee member wants to stay on the board, we actually never post it for applications. We never tell the community, this term is expiring. If you would like to apply for this seat, you're welcome to, which is really what we should be doing and it's already codified as a 3 or 4 year term. We just don't treat it that way. Now, if the existing board member wants to stay on the board, they can apply for that seat. And I assume in most every situation, they would be reappointed unless there's a reason not to, but we should certainly allow the community the opportunity to apply to be on a board or a commission at the end of each term, right? That seems like the most equitable and fair way to treat our community. There are, like you said, there are boards when none of us were even involved in interviewing them. I suppose we reappoint them every time it comes up, but really there's no one else applying for the seat because we never post it as a seat that someone can apply for. And so for me, the policy is already made. We've already done our job. We've already set the policy that this position is either a 3 or a 4 year term, depending on the board. I think it's appropriate to ask and direct staff to execute that policy by posting the position when it's going to come up and see if anyone else wants to apply for it. If the existing board member wants to apply, they certainly can too. But I don't see any reason to not allow anyone to apply for a seat when the term ends.
Okay, so then sorry, Chris, I'll come back to you in just a second. What is the next step after that then?
They would go through interviews like any other time there's applications for a seat. Whatever the policy is for that board, I know some of them is codified that the liaison and someone else interviews. Some of them have no code on the appointment process, but that's up to us too to determine how, or I go staff or us and how that's executed. But I would propose actually that they go through the same interview process that we put every position through now when there's a vacancy. That anyone that wants that seat, let's say the existing board member wants a seat, and maybe a new community member who may represent a community or a perspective that's currently not represented on that board, then they both get interviewed by the people who interview for that position. Council gets to look at the applications and determine whether or not the recommendation is appropriate, and then proceed with appointing to the board. They serve at the pleasure of the council, is the way it's written. And so I would prefer that we at least post the opportunity for anyone that wants to apply.
Okay. Councilor Banks?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think that since the council has the authority to make the appointments when they do become these just automatic renewals, it removes that power that's codified to the council. In other words, we don't really have an opportunity to exercise our power on these rollovers. I don't have a target of anyone on any of our boards. I'm thinking oh, I'd really like to get rid of this person, but I just think that the council should exercise its authority when the code says we should.
So I'm sorry, explain that to me. You're just saying
we don't have an opportunity to make that selection if we don't post the position and we don't have any other applicants. It's really easy for us to approve someone who's on the only applicant because there were no postings, there was no notification. That removes our ability to exercise our authority.
Okay. Yes, Councilor Marine.
Frankly, as the new person here, I'm a little surprised that this isn't already the process. Joe, maybe you can answer this. Is there a requirement in city ordinance that says you have to post these positions?
No, the process in some of these is set out in different parts of the code. So there are a lot of these exist, like CUB exists in our charter. The library, parks, and bike and ped exist in Chapter 2, and then Chapter 16 has the HLC and the Planning Commission. And so each code has kind of its own reasons for why it does things, but it also just has lived that way. We found out recently that the library actually is governed also by a state statute that also then gives term limits and the amount of term and who can be on there. So for different reasons, different committees have different rules, but we could mostly treat them all the same if you gave us that direction, with the exception of the library. We still have to follow the state statute. But
I would support that.
Okay. Other comments or? Okay, so I guess then in terms of do you have something?
Yeah, I'm still wrapping my brain around it. There's something to me that supports the idea of institutional knowledge on some of the committees. People that have been around for a long time and want to continue. It's good to have that because they have some of the institutional knowledge. They know what has been on that, and so I'd hate to jeopardize that. I do understand the other side of it as well, and so I guess I'm just trying to wrap my mind around it. But I don't want to forget about that institutional knowledge with the committee members that have been around for a long time on those.
Yeah, Art, to kind of circle back on your comment or question as well, our boards, committees, and commissions are an interesting animal at times. I mean, there's been times where, currently, I think we have 10 board openings or 10 board committee commission openings across all of our group, correct?
there will be, I think, 10 that are coming up on June 30th, if that answers the question.
10 that are coming up, okay.
But I think we have 8 current openings as
Yeah.
well.
So we're looking at potentially.
But we just filled a few
Filled some
tonight.
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, so prior to tonight, we were
Yeah.
looking at 8 open across all of our committees and boards, 10 that
10
are
new
coming-
ones.
that are
yeah,
coming up.
Or that will expire June 30th of this year.
Right, okay, and so we've had times where we went months without having a planning
person apply for the planning commission. We just recently, like with our budget committee openings, Jason, you and I talked the other night, was it last year we were down 1 or 2 budget committee people?
I think it was one last year.
Yeah.
And there were 2 people that resigned within the last few months
Yeah.
of this year's budget.
You know, even our parks board for a while went a long time without seats and people. So it kind of ebbs and flows on. And so I think a lot of, historically speaking, was when people would just want to re-up, we're just glad to have people that wanted to be engaged and involved on our boards and committees. And it was just kind of became that like, okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for continuing on in that process. So that's why I think it's not maybe been codified to make it what kind of being said and discussed right now. So that's why. So yes, Councilor Spoon.
I think a couple of things. One is that I agree that 99% of the time the institutional knowledge is great. Sometimes you can get into groupthink where you have a board that's worked together for so long and you don't have fresh perspectives. But largely I prefer institutional knowledge, which is why I'm not proposing term limits. If you want to keep coming back to the board, please do. You know, that I'm not supposing or proposing that we have term limits. I think, you know, on the flip side, sometimes we have I've seen over the course of my time on council, board members that have been on the board a long time aren't really super committed to it anymore, have really poor attendance at those boards, but then keep saying they want to be on it. Meanwhile, there's someone that would love to be on the board and attend every meeting and be party to it. So I agree that institutional knowledge is great, not proposing term limits. I think we'll find that in most cases there won't be multiple applicants for a position, but for lack of a better word, some boards are sexier to the public than others, and we'll have boards until the end of this, and to the end of time where we struggle to get applicants, and we'll have boards where every time a position comes open, we have 3 to 5 applicants per position. That's just the nature of having boards that are subject matter based, right? So that's why institutional knowledge is great. I think we'll find that most of the time the existing board member will be the best board member, but not proposing term limits, but do think that it behooves us as a council to get as many different perspectives involved as possible, and that's challenging to do when we never post an open position.
Joe or Scott, I'm curious, and forgive me for just working through this in my brain as we're talking, but how often do we get calls at City Hall like asking about positions opening, like open positions, or if there's a position of it coming up? Like, it's obviously it's posted on our website when people's terms expire. Do we get a rush of calls around that time asking if that's going to be open, or?
No, and Maya could speak to this as well. It seems to be the pattern that we put it out there that it's open, and then there is some interest. But the notion that if anybody ever shows any interest, so sometimes they'll come and folks will have a good interaction with you guys, during citizen comments, and you guys will say, oh, by the way, we have, openings. And then those people might show interest, and then we'll put them on a list. Even if they're not interested in current openings, we put them on a list and always try to reach back out to them. So there is a list of kind of somewhat interested folks, just maybe not in very specific ones. They're more interested in other ones that they're waiting for the next opening. So if that helps.
Yeah, and then my other question, do we know how many positions on boards have been like multiple terms, or? It seems to me in the 4 years I've been on council, we've had, and maybe it's just been a lot of reappointments, I don't know, but it feels to me like we've had a lot of appointments, new appointments as well. So I guess I'm like, how serious is this, of where people, there's never a position open on a board for anybody that would want to join it?
Well, I don't, we haven't, I guess, done the metrics on that. I will say, I know for Cub, they do have the term limits of 2, and that's in our charter. We can't change it. And then the library has the term limits of 2. Other than that, I think all the others are just open-ended. And so I think there are certain ones that have had folks on there for a long time. But we benefited from that, say, on the Planning Commission, when there were people hanging out for a long time. But again, you can... doesn't mean you have to say no to the person.
Yeah, I guess I'd just love to see a case study or two of where, people are saying, I want to serve on the library board or whatever board, and there's never an opening. So I guess I'm just curious, like, how often that happens.
I think it's the burden of the government to do the outreach, not the burden of the citizen to do the outreach. It's our job to tell them there's an opportunity. We can't put the burden on the citizen to know that these opportunities even exist. And I think when you say that when we post these things, we get people applying, when we post that there's an opening, people apply for the ones that are, I guess, the most interesting largely. I think certain ones like Budget Committee don't always sound super interesting compared to, say, Bike and Ped or Historical Board or Parks, right? There are other boards that generate more citizen interest because they're more compelling to citizens. But I would object to the idea that it's the citizens' burden to look for opportunities and to engage with us. It's our burden. It's actually one of our values as a council that we own the engagement burden. Right? And this is a way for us to do that aligns with our values that we all agree to as a council.
I guess I was just asking, like, how often do we get people that are saying, like, I just really want to join this committee, and then there's never an opening? I'm just curious.
The only anecdotal information I have from my kind of little over a decade here now is there have been a few times where boards have come and they've asked to expand their membership because certain people did want to be on the board and other people didn't want to get off. And those are the only kind of anecdotal moments I know that specifically that addresses that question. Otherwise, I am aware that we've kept an interest list because when we finally did reach out, the person said, yeah, I'm not interested in those 2 openings, right? But let me know if something else is. And I don't know, I mean, you could weigh that as maybe they're not as interested as they were when they first called you up or whatever, but.
Did you have something you were going to say? Sorry.
Well, just actually, my answer came in that initially when this conversation started, I thought that the goal was term limits, but that's been answered, so I'm fine.
Okay. Councilor Banks?
Yeah, I would say about term limits, I'm the liaison to the Library Advisory Board, and I'd like to get rid of the term limits, but it's grounded in state law, so we can't do that. I agree. I'm not in favor of term limits either. I think that we would have potentially more interest in openings if we posted them more often. The only times we really have vacancies is when someone resigns. And there's a seasonal interest, I think, or at least could be, because these things always expire in June 30th. And so like the time to apply is right around then. And that doesn't happen if we just roll them over. So I think that we might get more interest in these things. And maybe not. I think you're right. I mean, sometimes we have shortages. We went without somebody on the library board for quite a while this last year.
Yeah. And it happens. I mean,
People aren't beating down the doors to try and get in, but I think we might have more people knocking at least if we made it more open.
Like Cat has two openings, 3 openings?
Yeah, we usually retain about 2 to 3 openings at a time.
Yeah.
There's it's one that's a little bit more challenging. It's also, if anyone's watching, low commitment, it's only every other month. So if you're interested in only 6 meetings a year but getting involved, and it's an exciting time at CAT, we've been making some big changes. But yeah, some boards are like that, that there always seem to be openings, and some boards, people, every time there's an opening, there's 4 or 5 applicants, right? It's just, that's subject matter based boards, that's how it is.
Yes, Councilor Marine.
To be honest with you, I don't really see the downside of posting these jobs. I don't see that as a threat to the institutional memory either. Likely the people are going to reapply, and if they're doing a good job, will probably be reseated. But I think we have a responsibility to the citizens to post those jobs and give everybody an opportunity to participate.
Do we want or need anything from staff on this at all, or is this are we at a, put this on the next agenda with what all do you all want?
I don't think this requires a great deal of complexity. If we just ask that staff treat reappointments the same way that they do vacancies. Joe, is that clear enough to staff?
It's a practice.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just put a little bit of clarification into that. And what we're talking about is, and Melissa went back and did some research on this in preparation for the conversation, and there's some language in the staff report to this effect that for as far back as our records show that she could find, this has been our practice, what you've discussed already, that if you're an existing member and your term's expiring, you can just simply seek that reappointment, and it has been that has been the process. There isn't, I think you kind of spoke to this earlier, Joe, there is no written policy, and I don't think there's anything in our code about the reappointment process, but it appears that this is such a long, kind of a historical and well-ingrained process that the staff's preference would be to change something like that significantly ingrained would be preferred, that since the boards, commissions, and committees serve at your pleasure, that you would direct us to your, give us a consensus direction if you wish to change that practice. So that's kind of, I think, where we're at. I don't know if you want to.
Are you receiving consensus?
Yeah, if we're seeing consensus here by a plurality, then I guess the other question I would have is if it comes back and no other person has had an interest in it and it gets to June 30th, would you guys be okay with reappointing the person if they're still interested without the interview process if it's only a process of one person?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would, if no one else has applied, I have no problem with them being recommended for reappointment to council.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm alone on
posting
that.
them?
Yeah, if
Yeah.
we're posting them.
Yeah, for me, it's more about the beginning of the process.
Okay.
Of opening up and providing opportunity. And the council then has the ability to reappoint, of course. It's strictly just treating reappointments and appointments the same.
Okay. And then, yeah, if there's only one applicant, then, and that happens to be the reappointment. Okay.
Yes, I'm just wondering what that timeline would look like when the terms expire June 30, then, for the July meetings would appropriately would want our new people on there. So what would be the application and interview window if you're going to post it for a term that's not empty yet? What's that timeline going to look like? I'm just curious how that would work.
Well, I think usually what happens is you start looking when you're on a board, and Councilor Banks might be able to speak to this. When you're on a board that does have a term limit, oftentimes the other board members are aware, oh, my second term's up, I'm going to have to find a replacement. And so the board itself usually kind of looks for interest too. So I guess every time that your appointment's going to be coming up, potentially, I guess, other people who.
Well, right, but we're not talking about boards that have term limits right now. So
Yeah.
we're going to be coming
Yeah.
up. We have several positions that will the terms end June 30. So when would we be posting those
1
as
month.
coming up open?
1 month, I think.
So typically, in again, years past, practice has been that the city recorder would notify those board members that were on each of the committees, the library, whatever, would send out the information saying, hey, your term is coming up. Are you planning on reapplying or not? And if they were going to reapply, then she would send them, great, please fill out the application, get it in. If not, then it would get posted, and it was generally posted for a month for people to apply.
Okay, a month of
if you
posting, and then you got an interview. So we're talking 6 weeks. So you could potentially end up with July meetings with no members.
Yeah.
Well, it could very well be the case at this point in the
I
juncture.
would think in this case, we would just go ahead and post for the June ones, and in the future, a 2-month period with maybe a 1-month window to apply and a 1-month window for the interview and appointment recommendation.
I'd leave that up to staff.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I understand we are,
It's
but,
our weeds to be in, though. It's not really, it's our policy, so it's not staff's.
well, it's not, again, Joe made a great clarification. This has been a practice, not a policy.
Right.
So if we want to change the practice and codify it as a policy, is that a consensus, or do we need to do a resolution of the council to do that? Or do we want to go to that level?
If you give staff direction to do kind of administrative activities, we can take your consensus and do it that way.
Okay, but, so I guess then what administrative activities do we want staff to do? Is that what you're hearing, you're asking us
Yeah.
to do? Okay.
So to come back with a less practice, more resolution?
I think that it's clear that, I mean, from my perspective, that our direction to staff is to treat each term end as though it were a vacancy, post those, and you guys let staff determine what that timeline looks like. And if they want to do that with the liaison or with the, or with the chair of each board to figure out what that timeline looks like, that's not a policy question to me, that's a practice question, but I think from my perspective, the consensus is just to direct staff to treat each term end as though it were a vacancy and post openings, and then staff can figure out what that looks like. Obviously, we're running up on June 30th this time, so probably a very soon posting of these ones, but in the future, we can create a long-term practice. I don't think we have to overcomplicate it with telling them exactly what to do.
Again,
Yeah.
I'm not trying.
No, I know
again,
you're not.
Yeah, I'm not trying to tell them, I mean, again, I guess how much structure do we want to add as a practice versus a policy? I guess that's what I was trying to drive at. And so if we just want to change the practice, then I guess that's the call of the council to do that, right? So.
And if you want in the future to have any particular board be a particular way, we can always go back, with the exception of the one in the charter, which requires, and the library one. And then the PC has its own process too, because, right, you have to go to planning commission to change the planning code, or the HLC. But if you want to individually choose a different, approach for each board, you can. It's just tonight, the question was, how do you want to deal with these, it was presented to us, we didn't present it to you, but this notion, it sounds like you want to present, or want us to deal with openings that are coming up this June 30th and then beyond.
So council, nod of heads, can I see?
Doing this.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I think that changing policy at 3.5 hours in, we're all a little rummy. So if we want to make different changes later, but for right now, just the posting them, I guess that doesn't hurt anything.
Okay. I guess that's the consensus then?
Okay.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you guys. Okay, mayor's business and such. I will try to be brief. It's national, all sorts of weeks, apparently. So first up is National Public Works Week. So yay to Jerry and Spencer, come back on up to the table. Let me interject some energy into this meeting. So the press release that went out, so the city of Canby is proud to participate in National Public Works Week and recognizing the city's Public Works Department. Oh, Jamie's taking pictures. Public Works is comprised of a variety of departments and initiatives, including street maintenance, wastewater treatment plants, stormwater, cemetery, facilities, park maintenance. The Public Works Department is overseen by Jerry Nelzine, our Public Works Director, and who is assisted by Parks Lead Jeff Snyder, Public Works Lead Spencer Pollock, Meg Spencer, Wastewater Treatment Plant Lead Dave Connor, and Facilities Lead Dustin Breeze. According to, quote, Scott Archer, our city administrator, over the last few years, Public Works has shown up for Camby time and time again, whether it was during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, throughout the catastrophic wildfires, or working tirelessly during the 2021 ice storm. Our public works staff came to work to serve the community. I am proud to have each and every one of them on the city's team. As are we. So, and I think he sums it up best in regards to essential workers, though, that during all that goes on, whenever we go to our water faucet and turn it on, the water comes on. Our toilets make sure that they flush, and we have clean drinking water, and streets are cleared. So I appreciate you guys and your teams very, very much. So thank you for what you do. Yeah, thank you guys. Yes, you can ask something, Councilor Varley.
Before you guys leave the table, Jerry, Spencer, before you guys leave here, I just wanted to add,
they are also some of the most amazing volunteers that you'll ever find, because whenever there's a city event, there's two people I know I'm going to see at a city event helping set up, helping tear down, helping make stuff work. And maybe it's because you're getting a paycheck, I don't know, but you look like really good volunteers when you're doing it. So great job, you guys. Just very proud of you guys.
And then the other, was National Police Week. It's going on, it ends today. May 11th to the 17th was National Police Week. Is it Sergeant Walbaum now? It is. He left, but.
Yeah, he had to go.
He had to go. Get in his rolling office. But again, our Canby PD, much, as part of the first responders, again, they do a tremendous amount for our community, and I appreciate all that they do day in and day out. So thank you to them. So if you see any of our public works guys digging a trench, clearing a water line, out running a street sweeper, stop them and say hello and thank them. If you see one of our officers, thank them as well. So thank you to both groups there for making our city what it is. Let's see. She's not here this evening, but our very own city recorder, Melissa Bissett, it is her birthday today. So, so give her a call tomorrow and wish her a happy birthday. We had the Parks meeting the other night, so some agenda highlights from that. So, the community park pond treatment is scheduled. So we'll see the second treatment of the community pond, which will help clear up some of that, the green algae piece. That's part of the project. We're trying to get that improved. Locust Street, we're working on the picnic shelter. So the pre-construction of the picnic shelter there at Locust Street has gone to the manufacturer. So they're working on that. We expect the materials in August. Obviously, supply chain, costs of steel, all those pieces are delaying that project, but we're thinking the goal is August for the materials for it to be starting to be built. So more to come on that. Maple Street Park, the pickleball courts, depending on weather, I think we're getting those coated here within the next 2 weeks, Jerry?
Yes.
Pickleball courts?
Start hopefully with weather for next Friday.
Next Friday, perfect. There is a ribbon cutting for the pickleball court on June 9th at 4 p.m. My understanding is that there'll be a ribbon cutting, a ceremonial smash, I say smash ball, pickleball competition, and then I think Canby Fire and Canby PD are going to go at it in a friendly competition where I think Chief Davis said donuts were on the line for the police department. Also, along with the pickleball court in Maple Street Park is the outfield netting around that to prevent foul balls and whatnot from getting out of the softball fields. The FEMA tree removal program that has been completed and done. There's some work to be done out at the Camby Adult Center, some ground pieces, and I think, Jerry, we have new trees that we're planning on planting there at the Adult Center, and
Yeah, we're getting a plan together for that.
perfect.
Sorry I'm paying attention. It's George Troe is giving me a hard time. He got more cookies than us public works people.
Oh. Okay.
The week's not over.
It's not over. So we had an update on the park budget from Jeff and Jerry and Jeff Snyder. Just talking about just some of the pieces in the budget regarding the plans and expenses for next budget. The Bike and Ped group was there. They did a presentation on the logging road trail. So there's been some work regarding and I didn't bring the signs, but so they created some safety signs for pedestrians, bike riders, and then those, walking their quadrupeds on the trail. There are going to be signs in both English and Spanish. They're going to be 24 by 30, so they'll be very sizable. And then there are going to be 4 different locations that those signs will be. You'll see them by the Canby Maintenance Yard on Territorial, south of Territorial on the trail, near the bridge, and then near the south end of the trail. So be on the lookout for those. We did get a steering committee update regarding the Parks Master Plan. So here's the tentative plan, and I need some feedback from the council. So the draft will be in the city's hands on the 23rd of May. It'll get sent out to the council and to the Parks Committee for, as well as posted in our packets online, for that to start to be reviewed. On June 1st, we will have a joint work session between the City Council with City Council and the Park Advisory Board to go through the Park Master Plan draft for conversation, breakdown, etc.
Will Greenplay be there for that?
Yes,
Okay.
Greenplay will be here for that. They will present. Make note that we are going to do a 5:30 start time. I've asked staff to bring dinner in, so we're going to break bread at 5. At least food will be available so that we can have dinner, dive into this, because it is a city council night. Unfortunately, there are some items that we're going to have to do second readings on and whatnot. But so whatever we finish the draft review, then council, so we should probably make sure that there's coffee beverages as well, or energy drinks. So that's the plan with the work session. Turnaround time according to Greenplay from the draft meeting to final draft is about 2 to 4 weeks, depending on how much feedback or whatever changes we recommend or we want to see. The other piece was, now again, when we do work sessions, we don't generally do public comment during the work session. In our contract with Greenplay, we still have the opportunity for one more community outreach meeting. With the Parks Board conversation last night, thought doing something at the PD, not quite the in-depth dive that we're going to do, but at least a presentation of the high points of projects, discussion, some funding pieces and whatnot. So Greenplay would come and do that as well.
Are you thinking between the work session and the final draft, or after the final draft?
No, in between, because
In between,
they're going to
perfect,
start
yeah.
working on
Great.
our recommendations and changes and whatnot. But then when they bring it back, depending on what the community comes back and says, or what they email and write in on or whatever, then they can then incorporate that piece to it. So Scott's going to work with Greenplay on the meeting on the 1st, and then also the community meeting. So any thoughts?
Lock and load that date now.
Yeah, so I think
Shortly after the June 1st meeting, because I want to push them on the 2-week side of that time frame versus 4 weeks.
yeah, so
So that we get it in 6.
So Jeff Milkus from Greenplay was on our meeting last night. So he'll be circling back with Ryan Potter probably tomorrow or early Monday or Tuesday of next week. He's got some personal things he's got to take care of. And then we'll get that date planned for the community event for people to come out and be a part of that. That was it on the parks front. Reminder to the community budget meetings for the council and the budget committees are on tomorrow night's the first one at 6 o'clock here at City Hall. And then the second one for city budget and then the Urban Renewal Agency budget is on May 26th, also at 6 p.m. here at City Hall. And then, process question, public hearing on that is at the City Council meeting in June.
June 15th will be the meeting where you do all the formalities of budget adoption and hearings and all that.
And because I couldn't remember
Yeah,
if we did
second.
one with the budget committee at the second meeting as well.
The budget committee will approve the budget. There's also there's an approval of the tax rate. But I don't think the Budget Committee actually holds a public hearings, right? Yeah.
No, there is a public hearing at the second meeting for fee increases and things like that. Yeah.
And then, so
And acceptance of excise or liquor and shared revenues taxes.
So that meeting will be on June 15th. That'll be on our agenda for all that fun budgeting things. And then I have a updated tolling meeting tomorrow, which I'm so thrilled about. So that concludes my items. We'll start with Councilor Spoon.
Thank you, Mayor Hodson. As we said already, there are openings on the Canby Area Transit Board. Please apply if you're interested in transit. We are making changes. We have that circulator now, and there may be future adjustments to that as well. So if you're interested in transit, please come join us. 3 other things. Usually the high school does 8 performances of the play and the musical each, but there was an illness outbreak amongst the cast this year, so they were only able to do 2 of the 8. However, it was just announced today that they are coming back to do a full performance on May 27th and May 28th, which is next Friday and next Saturday at 7 p.m. So if you missed the performance, but you want to see it, these kids have not been able to do very many performances for high school theater kids. And in most of them, until this one, they were wearing masks, so you couldn't even really tell who was talking. Anyway, this is a new and exciting opportunity. It's Sweeney Todd, but they are going to bring it back for 2 nights. So they get half their performances they were expecting, but at least they get 2 more. So please join them. Also, Bridging Cultures is this Saturday at 1:30 at Locust Street Park. It's
Is that later than usual? Isn't it usually like 11:30 or something?
Oh yes, I'm sorry. It is at 11:30.
Okay.
I said it's from 11:30 to 1:30. I apologize.
Okay.
Thanks for the catch. I don't want you to come at the end. Please come at the beginning. They are having Mexican folk music and folk dance this time too. Some entertainment. So please go enjoy it. My daughter will be graduating from college, so I will miss it. But I would love to be there because I love it when they bring in the entertainment. On top of the food, they're also going to have some community resources. And then also this Saturday, from 10 a.m. to noon, so you can do this before you go to Bridging Cultures, the Canby Police Department is bringing back the bike rodeo at William Knight Elementary School. So come get your kid a helmet, learn some safety, bike safety and whatnot, but some of these events that have been gone for a bit are returning, and it's nice to see them back. So thank you. That's all I have tonight.
Great, thank you. Councilor Parker?
Well, that was 2/3 of what I had to say. You didn't say that at the bike rodeo you can get a free helmet.
She said that.
Oh, you did?
But I did mention the snacks, so mention the snacks.
Snacks. And then the food is free at Locust Park?
Yeah.
Okay. The hour's late. I'm not going to get into this, but I did want to do a place marker for something. If you're like me, the number one thing you get from constituents is traffic. What are you doing about traffic? Why are you allowing these mega businesses to come in? Why aren't you doing anything about traffic? Why aren't you doing it faster? Chair Padden had a conversation that he had to preside over at the last Planning Commission that really opened up a foundational question that I don't have, and we don't have to talk about it tonight, but it's something I'd like staff and Planning Commission to talk about. And that is, do we have tools that would limit and control traffic? If I understood part of the discussion that took place at the Planning Commission, there's tremendous limitations on what we can do. One of the things I hear from citizens all the time is, well, why don't you make the Walnut Street go in first before you approve these projects? So I think there's an opportunity for some education. I think Chair Padden talked about that, of getting some talking points out to citizens. But also there's a binary question of what authority do we have to postpone, to delay major projects if we determine that we do not have the carrying capacity on our roads. If the answer is none, LCDC, state law, everything else, Okay. But that was one of the theoretical questions that was being kicked around. So, well, you know, we have limits on how much we can bring in terms of limitations on our parking and traffic. I would like to get a solid answer on that because I don't have one. But again, too late to get into that now, but I did want to put a marker in the sand and saying, this is really the number one thing that I hear from citizens is why do you keep allowing growth in the city without having a more aggressive traffic policy? So that's it. Happy Bike Day.
Mr. Mayor.
You've already talked.
I know. Can I just add to that I would be interested also in our discussion, maybe having Planning Commission make a recommendation to us about their thoughts about traffic too, that it can come from both areas, so.
I know the Traffic Safety Commission always has thoughts on traffic.
There we go. Let's get some more.
Council President Hensley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No liaison report, but I did want to make sure the community was remembering that on Memorial Day, the American Legion Honor Guard does two presentations, one at 9 a.m. at St. Patrick's Cemetery and one at 11 a.m. at the Zion Memorial Cemetery. And then after that one, chicken dinner at the Post.
Perfect.
And everyone's welcome.
Thank you. Councilor Varwig.
Yeah, I'll keep mine short and sweet, but it's been a while since we've invited Chief Davis up to share anything about the fire department. While he's coming up, I'll just say, obviously, we heard tonight that the Planning Commission has been working on a lot of things. They've been doing a fantastic job working through code, so they have been staying very, very busy. And yeah. CTV is still working through, I believe, all of the details with potential merger. So I'm still working through that. So, good evening, Chief.
Good evening, and I'll be brief because it is getting late. First of all, good news, the fire station, we're tentatively going to open the Northside Station on July 2nd. We're trying to time that with the 4th of July. We have been working with the city for Independence Day as well as the fireworks down at Trost. Baker Prairie again is back, and we will be holding the fireworks this year. So that's all great news. For those that don't know, we're working with the Rotary in regards to putting in emergency supplies for disasters. We have a building that we're using that we pressure washed this last weekend. We've raised about $28,000 with the Rotary Foundation to purchase generators and chainsaws so that if we have another heat wave or we have another power outage, we'll have numerous generators and chainsaws to work. So great work by the Rotary and the Rotary Foundation on that project. Camby Fire continues to be the third busiest fire station in Clackamas County, with our call volume continuing to increase. And the firefighters are doing a great job. This is Wildfire Preparedness Month, and we've held two seminars down at the fairgrounds. One tonight in Spanish. We worked with Bridging Cultures to bring in the Spanish population to talk about wildfire preparedness and how to be ready during wildfire preparedness and what you can do to make your home safer and be ready to go. All that information can be found on our fire department website, both in English and Spanish. The Board of Fire Commissioners have approved, or I should say the Budget Committee has approved the budget, and in June we'll finalize and present the budget to the Board of Fire Commissioners. So we do have a budget ready to go. We did promote 3 lieutenants for the Northside Station. Those people are Craig Anstein, Austin Holmes, and Derek Clark. Very proud of those gentlemen for their promotion to Fire Lieutenant. The Fire Defense Board, which I'm president of the Clackamas County Fire Defense Board, we've been doing a lot of work in the state with the Fire Marshal's Office in preparation for this year's fire season. The fire marshal's office has new initiatives out there. They're going to become their own office this year. They're going to be bringing on well over 100 staff because of going into their own office. It's going to allow us to have some flexibility and look at resources that we can possibly bring into Camby to strengthen our preparedness for wildfire in Clackamas County. But meanwhile, we've been drilling in preparation for this year's summer fire season, which is expected to be a very busy season. Not so much in this area with the rainfall. As you can tell, our fire season is anticipated by the middle of July. It's just going to be worse because of how high the grass is, live fuels. It's not going to take much to dry that out, so we're preparing for that as well. But we do mobilize, and we've already been advised twice now for fires down in California, because we do go on EMAX down to California for fires in California. And as you've seen on the news, California, Texas, Arizona is burning up as we speak. And lastly, we are putting together our consultant to update our fire department strategic plan, which we budget around every year too. So unless you have any questions.
Well, I will add to that. The chief, what he didn't tell you is that we have him to thank for the fact that we still have our fireworks show. Him and a few other chiefs. Clackamas County was considering putting a fireworks ban, and Chief Davis, along with some others, went to our county commission and said, we don't think that we need that. And so we thank you for that, Chief, and making sure that we, after some time away from good times, that we get to have that back. And the other thing is that they will be in this Canby Chamber, plug for the Chamber, Swinging Good Time Golf Tournament is coming up, and they are going to be barbecuing lunch again this year.
I'll be there cooking hamburgers, yes I will. But the fireworks, thank you. And the fireworks, we encourage people to come to fireworks displays. It's much safer than setting off illegal fireworks because they're, professionally set off, and we would prefer one location. And it's worked very effectively because we've cut down on emergency calls considerably by having public displays. Thanks.
Thanks, Chief.
I have nothing more.
Great, thank you. Counselor Banks.
Thank you. The Library Advisory Board met yesterday evening here, and there were only 4 members of the 8, and there was a discussion about whether they even had quorum or not. And they didn't vote on anything in violate quorum other than adjournment. I did have some notes on a yellow pad that looked a lot like this. This is not the yellow pad, however, so I don't have any more to say about the... It looks a lot like. Yeah, it was the same yellow. So I don't have much more about that. I would like to congratulate the appointment of Amy Noss. We are now full for another 6 weeks. The school district is running its last few weeks here. We have, I think, 13 days left with seniors, 16 days left for K through 11. The rains have been very helpful for maintaining focus at school. Rains kind of are a drag because you don't really get to mow the lawn when you want to, but it really has helped our school focus. Today was not a good example of that because it was senior skip day. The district has announced we have a new principal, Carrie Sloan. She's our associate principal right now. Greg Dinza is retiring. And we also have Andy McKean, who's the current Eccles principal, is going to become our human resources director as Michelle Riddell moves off to North Clackamas. Last week, the graduates got their gowns and their caps and toured all of the elementary schools and middle schools and walked through them all in a graduation walk that we had started like the year before COVID, and the kids really liked that. Yeah. Then we haven't done it since then. And we are also able to host the 8th graders at the high school for the first time in 2 years. So the 8th graders got to tour through the high school, nervously clinging to the walls. We do have a COVID outbreak going on. We had, I think, 15 staff out today. And there's a lot of absences outside of just the seniors. And so, yeah, the play did get canceled, but you took that from me. You're not the only one that she steals from, Greg. And yeah, so we're excited that it's coming back. And that's about it for the school district. So that's all.
Thank you. Counselor Marine, I know you and I have to still get we'll calendar this evening a date, and we'll talk about liaisons for you as well. And do you have any comments on anything that you'd like to share, please?
Well, I really just wanted to thank Councilor Spoon for reminding us about the Bridging Cultures event, and especially Sweeney Todd, because I didn't know that was going to come back. And those kids worked so hard to put on those performances, and they didn't get to do it for a couple of years, and it's really been a disruption for everybody. So I'm glad that there's at least going to be another chance. And so thank you for reminding us. And it's 10 o'clock, and I'm last, so I'm going to hang up.
All right. Perfect. Thank you all very much. City Administrator Business and Staff Report.
Mr. Mayor, I do have some items. I'm going to go as quick as I can, and then at the end, I'm going to ask Jamie to come up and help talk about the open air program. So first, the quiet zone.
Appropriate.
I called it in for 10:01, so right on the mark. So that project is, as you all know, not yet complete. We still have to do the final safety striping around the intersections and the crossings, and as was mentioned earlier, some weather-related projects. The pickleball courts, this is the same thing. We've been waiting for a stretch of weather that allows that. So it looks like we're anticipating getting the striping done next week, May 25 through 27. That's also weather dependent, so that could change, but hopefully we'll have enough good weather that'll allow that. Then we have to await the railroad to do the final sign off, and that could take some time. They're going to do things when they're going to do them, and we're going to do our best to work to get that done as quickly as possible. This also is, we had given you a tentative date at one point of June 2nd for a grand opening ribbon cutting for the quiet zone and the arch. That's going to be pushed out because of all these delays, to be determined, but it will be this summer, and we will keep you informed. But as far as the quiet zone goes, it's important to note that it is not yet in place. I've received some feedback about that recently, and we're going to push out some public information through our various outlets, news release, social media, et cetera, to make sure people understand we're still waiting for that to be in place. Recently, you've probably seen our hanging baskets around town. Thank you, Jerry, Spencer, and our Public Works team for putting up 90+ hanging baskets. We've also put up the high school banners on the light posts around town. The Ivy Street power undergrounding, it doesn't probably look like it, but we have actually completed phase 1 of the undergrounding of the power. That phase 1 is between the stretch from 99 to 2nd. Phase 2 is beginning. So we've begun actually installing the underground power, but the overhead power lines and the poles are still in place. Those come down at a later point, but we're actually connecting power to those residents and businesses in that area. And then one other item I have before I hand it off to Jamie is, given the hour, I was going to talk about this a little bit more, but I'll just plant a seed and then maybe come back to this. And that has to do with our street maintenance fee update that we've been talking about and working through. And in some continued conversations that I've been having and doing some additional research, staff has been following up on the council's last discussion that we had at a recent work session. But the more I've dug into this and some conversations, and including with Mr. Padden, who's here tonight, who was involved in this, it became more apparent that there was a committee that was involved in the early formation of our street maintenance fee that was kind of made up of representatives of the community, businesses, residents, some council representation, some staff representation that actually worked very hard for a good period of time and actually made the recommendation to the council that then it became the adopted ordinance for the street fee. So I guess I'm planting a seed as a thought. Maybe we'll come back and visit about this at a later date, but that the notion that perhaps we should think about engaging a committee like this again in this fee update and actually help us reach a recommendation, and we could talk more about the specifics of that, but just wanted to plant that seed and see if that's something that you might want to think about. So, and then the last thing, I'm going to ask Jamie Stickle to come up. Council, our temporary open air, the open air Canby program, which is a temporary program, has been extended once previously by you, is set to expire on June 30th. With no further action on that, that program will expire. There's been discussion previously with you about creation of a permanent outdoor seating program to sort of take the place of that. So I've asked Jamie if she could give you a briefing on that and get some feedback, and then we'll take that forward, and we can certainly have further conversation. So Jamie?
Great, let me just share my screen. Hello, Mayor and Council. So I have just a quick update that talks a little bit about what has happened and kind of how we got to today. And so the Open Air Canby program was created and passed in October of 2020. It was created in response to the COVID-19 pandemic when businesses, specifically food and beverage establishments, weren't able to have indoor seating. The Open Air Canby program was not only aimed at restaurants and bars. Other establishments like professional services could apply, but typically what we saw once this was passed by Resolution 1342 was that restaurants and bars, eateries were the ones that were taking advantage, specifically those that did not have additional outside seating already. At the time, the expiration date was December 31st of 2021, and it was for expanded outdoor seating into private outdoor areas or private parking lots. While it does not require a permit, there are requirements that are included, which include permission from landlords, that the state of Oregon COVID-19 requirements were met, and the reason I put a notation there is just that those have all gone away. That the area does not include ADA parking, loading zones, travel pathways. It needs to be utilized without removal of landscaping or resulting in permanent site improvements, maintains clearance from fire hydrants, and that the OLCC requirements still need to be met even if the typical code requirements for especially a parking lot were being waived. So on October 20th of 2021, staff came back and talked with the council at the time about continuing the Open Air Canby program. And there was a lot of great dialogue at that time about making sure that it was, if we're continuing it, can we, make sure that we're explicit that it's for outdoor seating so that someone doesn't just store their excess chairs in a parking lot to the side. So staff brought back a resolution 1360 on November 17th, which authorized the extension of the temporary program until June 30th of 2022, and then directed staff to work on a permanent program, which would potentially include public on-street parking stalls as well. And there were a couple examples noted. One was Oregon City, and I did find those pictures, and I have included them in this. And then I'm noting also the food cart pod ordinance, which was underway starting in August of 2021. And at the October 20th meeting, there was discussion by City Council of asking staff to find a way to kind of not partner those programs, but provide balance between the two so that we're not asking one business to provide shelter in one way and then allowing another to provide a temporary tent or something like that. City Council and Planning Commission reviewed that in August, I think again in early November on November 3rd, and then at the then when it went before the Planning Commission, they had, I think, 2 to 3 more work sessions to really dig in, make sure that they were doing their due diligence, finding a program that is something that would be able to last for a long time. So the ordinance went through at the April 20th City Council meeting, with the second reading at just the last City Council meeting, and then there's a 30-day waiting period on that. And so this is the pictures. And I wanted to include just a few community comparisons. So Oregon City's program is a temporary program. It's set to expire at this time, May 31st. The Economic Development Department has indicated that the commission is likely to continue, and they really talk about outdoor seating more specifically than just in private parking lots or calling it a parklet. And I also, these 2 pictures are from Councilor Spoon. I happened today to be in Oregon City meeting with Clackamas County Economic Development staff, and I stopped in to talk to the Downtown Oregon City group just to ask, because the photo that you see on the top, there is a sign on it right now that says for sale, and it looks like the kind that you would put in a car. And so I actually assumed that someone probably, a kid took it off someone's car, put it on. So what has happened, I guess, for this case, the Nebbiolo Wine Bar, which is the example, both of those are the example, that was conversation between the landlord and the business owner, and that extended or expanded seating into the parking stalls is going to be removed. And specifically, the conversation was about the reduction of parking at that space. So it was interesting because Oregon City's Downtown Association had indicated that they thought the whole program would go away. And they said something like, well, it's really great because we have so much more outdoor seating on our sidewalks, which is not really what we're talking about here. We have a sidewalk cafe program, but they're kind of lumping it all together. And I even asked if there were any businesses that previously had outdoor seating before, and really they only noted one other business downtown that they could think of that had outdoor seating before the pandemic. So it's sad to see, but I'm glad also then to follow up with Oregon City and see that the whole program isn't going away. Portland Bureau of Transportation, their program is also temporary. It's set to expire June 30th. Then they'll extend it to August 30th, 2022. And then a new permit cycle will begin in September. And then I wrote compliance noted on the website. So there were several sections on this part of of Portland's website that talked about compliance needing to bring businesses up to compliance, or the level of compliance that they would need. And it seems that, to me, by reading that while it may indicate that there have been some issues, it also indicates that they're trying to make that a permanent program, which would make sense, because I'm sure many of their businesses who have been using, outdoor parking area like that have been successful. And then also I wanted to note that Milwaukee has had a permanent program since 2014. It's seasonal, so April 1st through November 30th. But way ahead of the times, and the Dalles was one of the first in the state of Oregon to have a parklet program. I also wanted to bring some information just about the sidewalk cafe permit and the sidewalk vending permit. Sidewalk cafe is, when you think about Gwen's Coffee House, and on a nice sunny day when all the people are sitting outside, they've applied for a sidewalk cafe permit, walked them through that process, and it really requires that they provide a scaled plan, that they are clear of fixtures, lights, trees, ADA pathway. They provide insurance. They file an alcohol plan with OLCC. It's approved administratively. It's the annual permit fee is $50, and then they have a right-of-way rental fee for $2. That was pulled from the master fee schedule. And then the sidewalk vending permit, it's much smaller, not to exceed 24 square feet of sidewalk. It's for mobile devices, and push carts cannot exceed 6 feet. For edible and non-edible items, a picture of a ice cream place is there. because I was trying to think of what kind of business would use a sidewalk vending permit. I have, to my knowledge, never seen one in use here in Canby. And then I also included that fee as well. That brings us to 2022. Currently, only one business has continued to utilize the Open Air Camby program after the mandates were removed. So when the mandates were removed as far as social distancing, and especially the weather came back, where certain businesses were able to just utilize their outdoor parking as they had it, or I'm sorry, outdoor seating rather. It is late, isn't it? And that's FOB Tap Room. They did relocate the ADA parking stalls, which were directly out of their front door. And they did that because for sightline reasons with OLCC, they had to be able to have their servers have eyes on the patrons. And so that was the best fit for that. And they paid to move those parking stalls down, shift them down. They worked with the property management there. They have expressed, every time I see Steve Puga or run into him, he expresses that he would love to see this program continue. He finds it very, very important to the success of his business. And his intention is that if a program or if there's a way for him to continue an outdoor seating area as pictured, that he doesn't want it to look temporary. He wants something that looks permanent. He wants to install like a floor mat that kind of gives it a little bit more of a permanence. The barricades that are there, those would go away, and something more permanent for fencing would go around. I did receive a recent inquiry from a downtown business about if there is a program in place for seating in the public on-street parking. And then they also asked, I sent them information about the Open Air Camby program, and they were unsure of if they were going to do anything to move forward, what they were going to do moving forward. But I was able to provide a little bit of information.
Can I ask you a question about that example?
Yes.
Since we're on it. So it's great that they moved the ADA parking spots. Did they also, I'm trying to remember, I'm often in that area, but did they also move the ramp?
They did. They did the curb
I thought
cut.
they did.
One of the spots also is a van accessible ADA
Perfect.
parking. And then that's one of the things that I don't think that they planned, but that worked nicely about putting these spots here, is that because it had been the ADA parking, then it's accessible for all patrons to be able to get into that area. And they have a lot of their patrons who are veterans and some that are older. So I think that is used to their benefit as well. And so what Scott and I have discussed is that tonight we're just really looking for some direction on if we would like to, now that the food cart ordinance or food cart pod ordinance has been put into place, although it's within the 30-day reading, but work with planning staff to get something that is permanent, which would mean if we were to do that then we could potentially, kind of follow suit from some of these other neighboring communities and extend our program again to keep the continuity for our businesses and the availability, but then also make sure that we're applying the same standards or similar standards that we do to the new food cart pods, to the outdoor seating, or it could also sunset, or I feel like there was a third option in my brain and I got two out, and I'm gonna just chalk that up to the late hour. And I do know, and just I said that I told Don Hardy, who is our planning director, that I would note this, but that recently at a traffic safety committee, there was some conversation about this specific outdoor seating program, and that he informed them that the committee, or at least the staff person who would be reporting back to the committee, that it is part of a city-led program, that they're not just operating in a parking lot without rules or regulations. So with that, I will discussion and.
If I may augment for a second too, there's really several points to this, which I think you'd probably want to unpack. There's the private use of private areas component, and then there's the potential public use, right, or private use of public areas, which is an entirely different question, at least legally speaking and liability-wise. So, but in either event, there is a very big planning discussion, because this one particular example, even though it's a private use on a private property, does basically use this program to look the other way when it comes to minimal parking standards. And so it is, if it's less than temporary, if it's permanent, then there is going to have to be some sort of process that they go through with the Planning Commission if you want a variance to get below the standard of minimal parking standards, because then you're basically asking for a variance. So it is a bigger question than just whether or not, if you're not just extending the current temporary program, if you're making it permanent, there are bigger questions.
Okay. Councilor Varwig and then Councilor Banks.
Yeah, so thanks for that presentation, Jamie. It was really great. That was one of the questions I was going to ask, and I appreciate you mentioning that they had moved some of those ADA ramps, because that was one of those things I recently noticed, and I thought, I don't know if that's okay. But I hadn't noticed that they had moved those ramps. So great. But that does bring up the question of, did that reduce the number of parking stalls in a parking lot that already doesn't have very many parking spaces for the uses that are over there? That was one question. The second question is, does this program allow for tents to be up over outside areas, and does that become then permanent? I can think of one, close by, that to me looks a little tacky, that's been up for a while and keeps going up, and I want to make sure that we just don't have a bunch of temporary tents up permanent year round. And then the last thing, and it's more of a concern, is with the continued growth of our downtown, we're already starting to see some parking struggles. And so to be able to take, if you do it for one business, you have to do it for all, right? At least all that meet the criteria. And so if every restaurant, every bar starts taking 6 parking spots, we eventually have nowhere to park downtown, and it's already kind of struggling. So how do we combat that problem when we already are starting to see parking issues downtown?
Should I answer those now?
Sure. Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't. But so obviously Joe talked about the ADA. Yes, it does. As far as the FOB, it does reduce the amount of parking available in a parking lot that was underserved to begin with. And so, I think that Steve would say that people they find a way to him, which is a really wonderful thing, especially, coming out of COVID and businesses not being able to operate. But it does, yes, reduce the parking. It does not reduce the ADA parking, which is a good thing. As far as the tent question go, yes, open air, the temporary open air Canby program does allow for tents. That kind of triggers a couple more things as far as a temporary vendor permit, which needs to go through the planning department. We also then send them information on how to reach out to the fire district, the fire marshal, that's the word I was looking for, the fire marshal, as well as Clackamas County. And I would like to note that at this time, the city only has had one application for open air Canby that is active, and that is at FOB. And then lastly, as far as the parking struggles downtown, yes, that's something that we hear routinely, especially, as things grow, and especially as, our mix starts to diversify. So then you might have people staying longer in certain places and businesses needing that turnover. We've done some outreach on parking downtown as far as providing kind of these cards for businesses. It really started with the addition of the Dahlia apartments, because then you have people who live there who might be parking in front of their neighbors for 8 hours a day or 24 hours a day, and parking right in front of a business that might actually need to have a little bit more turnover with their parking. And so it just is a card that says, kind of friendly reminder that this is 2-hour parking and that our businesses need 2 hour, they rely on the 2-hour parking in order to keep their doors open. And then on the back, it highlights the other areas that someone could park longer term, such as the parking lot over here or the parking lots on First Avenue.
Yeah, I think my concern is more not so much the amount of time that they park there, but once you start seeing, and maybe we won't see it, but I mean, even in some of the small parking lots, right? FOB has their spot, and what if the Thai food restaurant decides they want to put a spot out, and then Dutch Bros says they want to put a spot out, and then KFC wants to put a spot out? All of a sudden there's no parking, or Wayward goes out, Gwynn's goes out,
Well, those are
all those places go out, and now it's not a matter of 2 hours, it's a matter of 2 parking spaces for the whole downtown.
Right, and it is a little, those examples are a little bit different, just that one is a private parking lot, because even if you go to that parking lot in the middle of the day, whether that's to get your taxes done or go to Dutch Brothers, like the UPS store has some cones that have 10-minute parking right in front of it, and so they're able to apply different standards, not that it should be underparked, but that they can apply some of those, like this parking for this business, whereas downtown, to bolster your point, really relies on having parking for all, as opposed to just calling out spots.
Yeah, and I'm just concerned that if we create a permanent program that we're creating more parking issue. So I like the program, I think it's been great. I think getting outside is wonderful. I worry if we create a permanent program that we can't go back on it when we don't have parking. That's my concern.
Councilor Bangs and then Councilor Spoon.
I would support extending this temporary thing for another 6 months and then directing the planning commission to consider these issues. I know the parking thing has been talked about. I think it was in the Herald in the 1970s, the same discussions were happening. So that's one of the things about Canby is we always complain about parking. And, if you go to Oregon City, to the places you were talking about, if you can park within 2 or 3 blocks, you're set. You're happy with that. And in Canby, if you have to park across the street, sometimes it's frustrating, but it doesn't seem to me the same level of parking crisis as we have in Oregon City or in other places. But, I would like the planning commission to work out a discussion on the permanent thing and roll it over temporarily in the meantime through the summer, at least another 6 months perhaps.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Bangs.
Yes, I think Greg and I were reading through some Canby Herald archives, and there was a city council discussion in 1975 over whether or not they should enforce parking downtown. And I thought this sounds very, very familiar 40 some years later. So I am in favor of a permanent program. I am less in favor of rolling this over until a permanent program is in place. My frustration, and I think the reason we put the June 30th expiration on the current extension is because we didn't want temporary seating or going into tourist season. We wanted everything clean, and we didn't want these kind of temporary barricades or tents or whatever outside when we were doing July 4th. I would actually be in favor of letting it sunset now while planning works on a permanent program. And I also think that fresh start while working on the permanent program is valuable, so that you're not building a program around what exists. You're building a program that's appropriate for the community without trying to accommodate something that's already out and set up. So my preference would be for a permanent program, but let planning commission work on that. Let us work on it with them, whatever that looks like. But to really put that through a full, thorough process.
So you're saying thorough process, but sunset it here at the end of the month?
Yeah, that would be my preference, to go ahead and let it sunset and then start a planning process for a permanent program. And there's only a temporary structure up now, so For me, part of that is the reason, because I recall when we had this discussion last October, the ask was actually to extend it through the entire 2022. And as a council, we decided to instead have the expiration date June 30th specifically in mind for tourist season, all the people that want to use, that are outdoors and moving around in the summer with July 4th celebration coming back, that we wouldn't have a bunch of temporary structures up around town. That's actually why I recall us choosing to sunset it now. I think it needs to go through a full process. I can be convinced otherwise. It's not like, I'm not dying on this hill, but we chose this date for a reason when we went through this conversation in October. But I do want a permanent program. I just think that permanent program needs to go through the complete process of starting fresh, talking to planning department, talking to planning commission, figuring out what those design standards should be, figuring out what those limitations are. I also am for allowing public space to be used. I think as we work towards a vibrant, walkable downtown that people want to come and visit, that can really add to that. I want some conversation about it. I want some guidelines on it. I don't want it to be a complete free-for-all. So that's why I think we just need to start from scratch on the program.
Councilor Marine, Councilor Parker, thoughts? Council President Hensley?
I would actually be in favor of letting it sunset. I was sympathetic to the businesses. The reason the creation of this program was, the reason behind it was so that they could survive a pandemic and a ban on indoor seating. That situation doesn't exist anymore. So I think it served its purpose, and I would be happy to see it just happily go into the sunset forever.
You don't want to see it?
I don't want to see us using public parking spaces for private businesses when we're already adding more businesses downtown. We're adding residents downtown, which adds cars downtown. I don't think it's a smart idea to take up that those parking spaces. And that's not even talking about over at FOB, where Councilor Farwig makes a very good point. Maybe Steve's very happy with how that's helping his business, but I wonder how his neighbors feel about it.
Yes, Councilor Marine.
I'm inclined to agree. I think we should let it sunset. And I could probably be convinced that it's a good idea to make it a permanent program eventually. But I want to see what that looks like. I'm not convinced that the way it's come together now is the right way to do it. And the need we had is essentially over. Everybody's eating, drinking inside, and we have an opportunity to kind of take that next step back towards normalcy. And I think we ought to let it sunset too.
Councilor Parker.
Hi, how you doing tonight there?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm good for another hour and a half. Let's go.
I think Tracy makes a good point that this program was created out of a moment in time that doesn't exist. And Sarah's point of let's let that moment expire and now move towards something else and not blur the two. There's been a lot of writing about how during COVID people have rediscovered liking to be outside, being at cafes, and that sort of thing. I'd like that to be separate from an emergency plan and say, okay, what does it look like? Tracy brings up a good point. Do we or do we not want to have parking spots? That is a public policy question that we need to invite the public to help us on. And there's some new best practices on outdoor dining and that type of thing. So I'm inclined to let this one expire and move ahead towards something that isn't derivative of a COVID emergency, but rather is looking ahead and saying, what are the elements of outdoor dining? How do we balance that against parking, public safety, and that sort of thing?
So I guess, Jamie, I think it sounds like work on, more next steps in terms of moving towards a permanent program. My concern, again, what we're looking at, so we have one business right now on private parking piece. made the investment in moving parking spots around. Did the business, did FOB pay for that? So they paid for that to make those changes. And my guess is that probably the owner of the business has built goals and budgets around having that outdoor seating for this year. I think we're pulling the rug out on, I mean, at least for this particular business, that if we we extend it, it gives us time to at least iron this out so that they have something's in place for them to continue to be able to offer outdoor seating, because we're now going to suspend this or take it away when it's going to get nice and there's the want to sit outside. So, I mean, that's my take on it, but Councilor Spoon?
I see where you're coming from. I don't think the intent is to be punitive at all. I think, though, it was going to expire. We extended it kind of on their behalf because they were the only ones using it. But the conversation we had was that the city would engage with them. There was no guarantee it was going to be permanent. If they made their budget, frankly, if they made their budget decisions around something that they knew was set to expire in June 30th, we can't really take responsibility for that as a city government. And even more so, I think that that it's important that we separate the two conversations. And I think, when they leased that space originally, we weren't in COVID. They understood what the seating was and what they were able to do as a business. This has been a great bonus for them since they were allowed to use both spaces. I know it was an emergency provision that cost them some initial money, and I think it helped them survive. I'm glad we were able to provide this option, but there has also been a period of time where they've had expanded space beyond what they thought they could have when they initially leased the space. And I just don't think it's our responsibility. They knew it was going to sunset June 30th. We did this 6-month extension kind of explicitly for them to get through the winter, not knowing what COVID would do. So I don't feel the burden of whatever business decisions they made based on a temporary program.
No, and that's, I can totally hear that piece of it. I look at it too, and we're looking at, we're not looking at the loss of public parking spots. It's that business owner with that property owner making a business decision for that property. So I see there's a difference. If they were downtown eating up 3 parking spots, I could see that piece of taking that away from them. But here they are, worked out a negotiation with their landlord on that private property piece. I just look at it, are we being heavy-handed, playing the government role? I don't know, but I just think it's I just think it's a little, this time of the year when, again, businesses are still trying to get back on their, to square one or whatever. So, but it's the decision of the council. Yes, Councilor Park.
Well, Brian, I think that's an excellent point, that as we move ahead with a public policy discussion, that we are going to have to separate private lots from public lots. 2 entirely different things. Yeah. And in fact, I am wrestling with the idea that a private property owner has the right to do what they want. Is there any way that we can control if they wanted to take up all of those spots? I guess we can go back to the original conditions of approval for how many parking spots we were.
I think they got a variance.
That whole chaotic situation came during a decade where the Canby City Council was saying, whatever you want to do, we will be pro-business. Mm-hmm. People say, how were so many businesses crammed into that little place? It was the policy of the city at that time to say, if you want to do this, we're going to be pro-business. So that's how we got stuck with that big thing in the meantime. First parking lot ever. So, I could be open to convince, and I don't know if we can even come up with any sort of language of extending this for any current permit holders to give them a break on this.
Thank you. How long would it take to get a permanent plan? If we extend it another 6 months, would we be able to have something
worked on and approved in 6 months?
I think that would be, and I think that this is what you're about to say, which would, it'd probably be through the planning department, that the planning staff would be the ones taking it forward.
Yeah.
And so, it would be dependent on what they could do. I think that, like we had mentioned with with some of that food cart pod, some of that groundwork is in place, but that would be a planning department, determination.
Yeah, I see the sympathy, and I sympathize with them. I think that, when you're in business, and I do this in my business, is you have to make calculated risks sometimes. And I don't want us making permanent policy because somebody took a calculated risk during a time of a temporary program. And so I get what you were saying on that, and I don't think it's us pulling the carpet out from under them, because they knew it was temporary, and they made the decision to do it anyway. And so that was a decision and a risk that they took.
Sure.
And so I don't want us making our policy based on that.
Well, and I'm not asking for a policy, I'm just asking for, does it hurt us for another 6-month extension?
I don't think so.
If we did another 6-month extension for the business, or the 1 or 2 businesses that have this currently, that's my bottom line ask on that.
And they, in the last year or with the extension, there was a tent originally in 2020, but this last summer, this last winter, they didn't have a tent up.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that's anything that they are planning on putting back up.
No, I don't think it is either.
Regardless of.
But 6 months takes them through this nice stretch of weather or whatever, and keeps that environment. So I'll stop, I've made my case.
I have some struggle with the idea that we would say only people that are using it right now, because I don't want to give preferential treatment to one business or over another. If we're allowing one business to do something, it has to be equitable, I think, to other businesses. And that's where I have some heartburn, is I don't really want this emergency provision in place for another 6 months. I want us to work towards a new improved policy that doesn't blur the line between the two. It sounds like council's a little bit split on it. I don't know if maybe we just need to look for some consensus.
I still maintain it was an emergency provision. Emergency's gone, so it should sunset.
And the other thing I could mention is, to Councilor Parker's point, you do still have private property rights. They could always go back to the planning commission with some sort of modification and say, hey, we would prefer to have 2 less parking spaces, and see if they can figure that out. So even as the code's written today, they could try to exercise that option. Then it would be up to the planning commission whether or not they want to give that variance or not.
Nope, not yet.
I mean, you're throwing around planning commission.
I know.
Timelines and stuff, I can tell you.
Thank you, sir, I appreciate that. We'll get there. Hang on a second. So what is staff's desire? So suspend it and then,
Sunset.
Yes.
or sorry, suspend it,
Yes.
sunset it, and then,
Yes. That would
is
be
that Sean and, or?
staff. Yeah.
Okay. I guess staff has their direction then on that. Okay.
May we now hear from our planning commission?
Yeah, under citizen input, most certainly, which is actually next on the agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks, Jamie. 3 whole minutes. Sorry to keep you up so late.
Next on the agenda is citizen input. Is there anyone that would like to?
Input.
Counselor?
Would you like me?
Yes, Jason, please come on up.
So I guess just 2 things, because Plan Commission has come up quite a bit tonight. Real quick on traffic, one thing that I stress to the planning commissioners is that there's 2 different angles to the traffic. There's the perception of the system breaking down, and then there's the reality of the system breaking down. And what people don't realize is the perception of the system breaking down is here, when really the reality is over here. And so whenever people have that conversation with folks about traffic, it's very delicate to say that, but that's essentially the direction. As far as timing for planning commission, if you're talking about this, and because Don just gave us an update, apparently there are a ton of fairly large applications in the hopper, and so for probably June, July, and August, most of our meetings are going to be taken up with trying to cram 2, if not 3, applicants through the system. So trying to gobble this up on top of that, it would be months. It's not going to be, it'll be multiple months, not month or weeks. So I just wanted to let you know that.
No, that's fair.
Any other citizen input? No? Okay.
Spencer?
Maya, action review.
You have approved the consent agenda, adopted ordinance numbers 1571 and 1572, and resolution number 1365, and approved ordinance numbers 1573 and 1574 as amended in discussion to second reading on June 1st, 2022. You've also approved the appointments of Elizabeth Chapin and Hermann, I'm going to butcher the name, Maldonado to the Budget Committee.
Great, thanks, Maya. I will take, I think next on the agenda is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Cammy, good night, we are adjourned. Have a good evening. We'll see you in 2 weeks.